Thank you so much for watching the Thom Hartmann Program, our program here on Free Speech TV. We really appreciate it. The main way that we support our program, that all of us who work here get our paychecks and that we keep the lights on and whatnot here. Free Speech TV does that by asking you to donate, a couple times a year, and that keeps Free Speech TV alive. We keep our show alive principally, mostly, by advertising. We have advertisers who pay the bills. They support the program. And we've told you about some of them in the past, but really want to just move all that onto the internet. So if you would like to support our program by supporting our underwriters, our advertisers, you can go to thomhartmann.com. There's a complete list of them, or there will be soon, and just click on their little ads and find out what they have and be there for them and for us. Thank you so much. Today we're reading from Dorfman and Mallart's book, How to Read Donald Duck, Imperialist Ideology in the Disney Comic. And this is from the preface to the English edition. This book was first published in Spanish. To say that this book was burnt in Chile should not come as a surprise to anyone. Hundreds of books were destroyed and thousands more prohibited and censored. It was written in the middle of 1971, in the middle of the Chilean revolutionary process. Copper had been rescued, the land was being returned to the peasantry, the whole Chilean people were recovering the industries that during the 20th century had been the means of enrichment for Mr. Rockefeller, Grace, Guggenheim, and Morgan. Because this process was intolerable to the United States government and its multinational corporations, it had to be stopped. They organized a plan which at the time was suspected and since has been confirmed by Mr. Kissinger, Ford, and Colby to have been directed and financed by the United States intelligence services. Their objective was to overthrow the constitutional government of Chile. To realize their objective, an invisible blockade was imposed. Credits were denied, spare parts purchased for industrial machinery were not sent, and later the Chilean state bank accounts in the U.S. were blocked, and an embargo preventing the sale of Chilean copper throughout the world was organized. There were, however, two items which were not blocked: planes, tanks, ships, and technical assistance for the Chilean armed forces, and magazines, TV serials, advertising, and public opinion polls for the Chilean mass media, which continued for the most part to be in the hands of a small group which was losing its privileges. To maintain them with those of the U.S., their media prepared the climate for the bourgeois insurrection, which finally materialized some years later on the 11th of September, 1973. Each day, with expert U.S. advice, in each newspaper, each weekly, each monthly magazine, each news dispatch, each movie, and each comic book, their arsenal of psychological warfare was fortified. In the words of General Pinochet, the point was, quote, to conquer the minds, end quote, while in the words of Donald Duck in the magazine Dislandia, published in December 1971, coinciding with the first mass rallies of native fascism, the so-called March of the Empty Pots and Pans, the point was to, quote, restore the king. But the people did not want the restoration of the king, nor of the businessman. The popular Chilean cultural offensive, which accompanied the social and economic liberation, took multiple forms: wall paintings, popular papers, TV programs, motion pictures, theater, songs, literature. In all areas of human activity, with differing degrees of intensity, the people expressed their will. Perhaps the most important arm of this offensive was the work of the state publishing house, Quimantu, a word meaning sunshine of knowledge in the language of the Chilean Machupe Indians. In 2.5 years, it published 5 million books, twice the amount that had been published in all of Chile during the previous 70 years. In addition, it transformed the content of some of the magazines it had inherited from before the Popular Unity government and created new ones. It is in this multifaceted context, with the people on the march to cultural liberation, a process was also meant criticizing the mass cultural merchandise exported so profitably by the U.S. into the Third World, that How to Read Donald Duck was generated. We simply answered a practical need. It was not an academic exercise. For the Mad Dog Warriors on that September 11th, there were no paintings on the walls. There were only enormous stains which dirtied the city in memory. They, using the fascist youth brigades, whitewashed all the signing, many-colored walls of the nation. They broke records, murdered singers, destroyed radios and printing presses, imprisoned and executed journalists, so that nothing would be left to remind anybody of anything about the struggle for national liberation. But it was not enough to clean these cultural stains from the street. The most important task was to eliminate all those who bore the stain inside themselves: the fighters, workers, peasants, employees, students, and patriotic soldiers, to eliminate these creators of a new life, to eliminate this new life which grew, and for all that we created. This book, conceived for the Chilean people and our urgent needs, produced in the midst of our struggle, is now being published far from Chile in the uncle land of Disney, behind the barbed wire network of ITT. Mr. Disney, we are returning your duck, feathers plucked and well roasted. Look inside, you can see the handwriting on the wall, our hands still writing on the wall, Donald, go home. This is written in 1975. And then this from David Kunzel's introduction. The names of the presidents change. That of Disney remains. 46 years after the birth of Mickey Mouse, 8 years after the death of his master, Disney's may be the most widely known North American name in the world. He is arguably the century's most important figure in bourgeois popular culture. He has done more than any single person to disseminate around the world certain myths upon which that culture has thrived, notably that of an innocence supposedly universal, beyond place, beyond time, and beyond criticism. The myth of U.S. political innocence is at last being dismantled, and the reality which it masks lies in significant areas exposed to public view. But the great American dream of cultural innocence still holds a global imagination in thrall. The first major breach into the Disney of this dream was made by Richard Schickel's The Disney Version, The Lifetimes and Commerce of Walt Disney, the book How to Read Donald Duck.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Greetings, my friends, patriots, lovers of democracy, truth, and justice, believers in peace, freedom, and the American way. Thom Hartmann here with you. And on the line with us is Congressman Mark Pocan for the hour, Middays with Mark, here on the Thom Hartmann Program. And he'll be taking your calls for the hour, 202-808-9925. Congressman Pocan, welcome back to the program.
Hey, thanks, Tom. Very glad to be here.
And I should add, people can find your website at pocan.house.gov, and they can tweet you at Rep. Mark Pocan. We had quite an electoral upset in Florida last night. What are your thoughts on this? And Ron DeSantis, the Republican, the Trump-endorsed Republican, has already gone on Fox News. And speaking of his, the African-American fellow, Mr. Gillum, who won the election, saying that Florida shouldn't monkey up the state by electing this man. I'm curious your thoughts on all of this.
Yeah, first of all, it was a big victory. I mean, Andrew Gillum, I met him about a year ago, and I got to tell you, I hate when people do the Obama-esque comparisons, but I'm going to do one of those. I mean, he's a really smart, articulate local mayor, someone who has lots and lots of potential, and I think he's going to be a great candidate for governor down there. But as you mentioned, with Ron DeSantis, who's one of my colleagues in Congress, already race baiting. I saw a commercial that was an amazing commercial he ran during his primary, Ron DeSantis, where he's got his kid and his wife on the commercial, and he's building a wall with his child, reading out of Trump's book, saying "You're fired." All this ridiculous, over the top. Could you be any more of a crazy blind fan of the president? And that's what he's doing now, right? The president race baits, might as well race bait, and so it's going to be an ugly race. The good news is, again, Andrew Gillum, extremely strong candidate, surprised everyone in a primary, and ran on things like $15 minimum wage, Medicare for all, and as we saw last week, writers, 70% of the people around the country support Medicare for all. So he's actually talking about what people are talking about. DeSantis will be parroting whatever the president tweets, and it's going to be a stark contrast, but let's hope that the voters in Florida will get out and vote for their futures.
Yeah. Yeah, and Georgia, and Maryland. We've got this could be a great time for African American candidates, for women candidates, for people who have traditionally been locked out of the American political experience, and traditionally maybe is the wrong word, but I think it's appropriate. And step by step. I don't know if you caught this. I just wanted to share this with you. I thought it was fascinating. This is in today's Washington Post. Vladimir Putin went on TV last night on national television and walked back a proposal he's got. They have a Social Security program in Russia, just like we do here, or very much like ours. And in Russia, you can retire if you're male at the age of 60 and if you're female at the age of 55 with full benefits. And Putin wanted to raise that to 65 for men and 63 for women. And there was such a blowback across Russia to him doing this that he went on TV and backed down. Social Security, regardless of your country, regardless of your culture, regardless of your political system, Social Security is a big deal.
Absolutely. In fact, just talking about Florida elections, I hope this is something they talk about. Ron DeSantis and the House Republicans have been, wanting to mess around with Social Security and Medicare. And,
well, they want to raise the retirement age to 70, don't they? Isn't that the new Republican thinking?
Yeah, I think Duncan Hunter had that as a proposal. You've seen them want to privatize the programs. You've seen them try to voucherize Medicare, all these things that would affect something that we've all paid into all our lives, and now they want to change the benefits and the rules. And, I would argue the problems with Social Security are just the opposite. If you're a senior and you get the CPI index increase is what people get, the consumer price index increase, you don't spend money on gasoline. A lot of seniors aren't driving, but they do spend 25% of their income on medicine. We should be actually having an inflation index that matches that, and there is an index called the CPI-E that would do just that. So they're on the complete wrong side of this debate, and I think that's something that should be a big issue going into fall, is who's going to try to take that away or privatize it or risk the funds that you've put in your entire life to take care of that when you retire. And it's not raising the age, it's not cutting the benefits, it's not changing the program. It's making sure that we lift that cap so more money gets put into it. But more importantly, let's look at increasing that increase so that it actually addresses what seniors spend their money on.
Yeah, I don't know if any progressive politicians want to go this way. This was in one of the chapters in my book, Rebooting the American Dream, that Bernie endorsed. And although I don't know if he endorsed this specific suggestion, it's been a long time since we've talked about that topic. But I got together with a couple of economists, and or one in particular, ran it by a couple of others, and asked the question, what would happen if we lowered the Social Security and Medicare eligibility age in the United States from 65, and of course now it's going to be 67 as Reagan's reforms kick in, lowered it down to 60, which is what it is in Russia right now. What if we did that? And it looked like the result would be that it would open up about half of people in that 5-year cohort, 60 to 65, about half of them would probably take early retirement. And what that would do is it would open up millions of jobs for young people who are just coming into the job market, good jobs, the kind of jobs that people have held for a long time, number one. And number two, though, it would raise the pay on those jobs and thus increase the amount of money going into Social Security. It would essentially pay for itself. Has there been any discussion about this in progressive circles?
No, I think, the most of the debate's going around two, levels. One, people are living longer, so what does that mean, right, and how that affects the fund. But then, I think of things because, I come from, I'm an almost 30-year member of the Painters and Allied Trades Union. A lot of folks who work physically, at some point they can't continue to do that job in the same way. And, as they raise the age for retirement, they're making it harder and harder for them to be able to do that. So, there's a lot of variables that should be put out there if we're going to talk about this. And, what I'm afraid of is everything that Paul Ryan and the Republicans have put forward so far has been about, enriching Wall Street and giving them all that money because it's a big chunk of money, and that puts everyone else at risk.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let's pick up some phone calls.
Sure.
David, listening to our iHeartRadio affiliate, AM 960 in San Francisco. David, you are on the air with Congressman Mark Pocan.
Yeah, morning, Tom and Congressman. I was looking at impeaching Trump strategies, and I'm wondering, is there a database of the assets of not only Trump but of his cronies? It would seem to me that if the local district attorneys and maybe even state attorneys general were to look at asset seizure as part of RICO, that would be a way of inducing the Congress to actually get off their butts.
Congressman?
Well, I mean, excuse me, everyone has to disclose their assets if they're in the cabinet or if the president, obviously, himself. What we don't necessarily have are where the revenues come in for the president, for example. We don't exactly, he's not showing his tax returns like every other president has. I think one of the things that definitely would be a subject should the majority change in Congress is taking a look at this emoluments clause issue of, personally enriching the president and his family and his businesses while he's president. I mean, there's a hotel blocks from the White House in D.C. where we have all these foreign nationals coming to stay and explicitly saying they're staying there because it's his hotel, and yet clearly that's something that seems to run completely counter to the emoluments clause. So there's a lot of questions around that. The family businesses, the trademarks they get from different countries. The first country he visited as a president was Saudi Arabia, not Canada like most presidents, because of business interests, again, that he has. There's a whole lot of issues this president has made us have to take a look at, and those are certainly fair game and should be looked at to make sure that we're meeting the requirements that should be for a president.
Yeah. Chris in Salem, Oregon, listening on X-Ray FM. Chris, you're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Representative, when we look at certain, how the right has successfully done things with identity politics, and they have done, a lot of immigration and race baiting and things on like gay marriage, it would seem to me like a lot of moderate Democrats are looking at things that Antifa is talking about and like gender pronouns and all these kind of things that I feel are a real distraction. You'll notice Bernie Sanders didn't really run the gambit on identity politics, and it would seem like there's a large faction of our coalition that's kind of like all that they talk about. Is that a good strategy going forward among the House Progressive Caucus? We all want to bring people in, to our tent, but at one point is that going to, turn away moderates that we could, potentially bring in to our coalition?
Sure. Well, I think, the big issues that we're looking at towards November really aren't some of the issues you just brought up, but the big three issues that we've been talking about are one, health care. And you can include with that the price of...
Bring in our old buddy Thom Perez, the chair of the Democratic National Committee, the DNC, the former U.S. Secretary of Labor, Democrats.org, of course, their website. You can tweet him at Thom Perez. And Secretary Perez, welcome back to the program.
That is happening and that just keeps
bubbling up.
Thank you. A couple of things that I wanted to touch base with you on. I certainly want to get into the whole superdelegate thing. I think that's a big deal, and I wanted to talk to you also about the
your mortgage,
this whip the vote
for your family, can take a family vacation. Those are all relevant issues, and we're trying to really make that the theme going into November.
Congressman Mark Pocan with us. It's Middays with Mark on the Thom Hartmann Program, taking your calls for the hour. Our telephone number 202-808-9925. We'll be back with more of your calls for Congressman Pocan right after this. You can tweet him at Rep Mark Pocan, R-E-P like Representative Mark Pocan, and his website is pocan.house.gov.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Back with more of your calls for Congressman Mark Pocan right after this. And welcome back. Jack in Eaton Rapids, Michigan, watching us on Free Speech TV. Well, I used to have a really, really, really close friend who represented Eaton Rapids, in fact, in the Michigan legislature. Jack, you're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Oh, hi. I just wanted to point out that according to what I've been hearing, because of the deterioration of our food and everything, that and the amount of pollution we have, that our life expectancies have actually been getting lower here in recent years. Isn't that correct?
Jack, not that I've heard. I mean, I think what we've seen is, and this is an interesting separate debate, but people are living longer But what we're not addressing are things like Alzheimer's and other things where they say your body really starts to kind of break down at about 85 currently. But if you're, living beyond that, because many people are starting to, live longer with a lot of that health advances, et cetera, what is that going to mean in the future? And that's something that we're also going to have to be looking at. The other issue is retirement security. I think that's one of the major issues not being talked about that hopefully we'll focus on in the next few years. But, not just that, Social Security is something that a third of the people live on alone, about half the people that in the home they have. But more importantly, so many people now are listed as independent contractors that they probably don't have any kind of retirement. It's not just the multi-employer pension funds that people talk about. It's just retirement security in general. Social Security is not enough to live on, and we're going to need to address that as well. But there may be some conditions in different places that are making it harder, but in general, we've seen the trajectory. People are living longer. Part of the problem is the body may not be keeping up.
I think what he might be thinking of, there was some interesting reporting a few months ago out of West Virginia that longevity is actually declining as a consequence of the opioid crisis. The opioid crisis.
Because that factored in.
And it's like when people in their 20s die from overdoses, right, that hugely affects the average age. Yep. So, but anyway, Mike in Tampa, Florida, watching us on Free Speech TV. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan. We have 1 minute and 30 seconds to the break. A quick one, Mike.
Okay. I voted for Andrew Gillum, and I saw that Fox News earlier with Ron DeSantis. Since they're already going to call us socialists, and Andrew Gillum's really just a progressive, shouldn't we just stick for what we want, like Medicare for all and $15 minimum wage, and just make no apologies for it?
Yeah, I mean, he has been. I really find he's a fascinating candidate because he's so good. When I met him, I was like, wow, this is a guy that hasn't really been on the national stage and really articulate, very smart, and, taking on progressive issues, taking them right to the people. So DeSantis is going to do what they can. They love to say socialist. They're trying desperately to make you not look at what's actually happening with the culture of corruption in Washington. And let's face it, Ron DeSantis, constantly hugging the president is about as close as you can get to that corruption as possible. You got a choice. Do you want to go down that path, or do you want to have someone who's going to offer something aspirationally? And I think, in Florida, thanks for your vote, and hopefully you'll all make that right decision as that governor's race comes up.
Yeah, it's going to be a very interesting election. That and the senatorial election in Florida too, where we've got Rick Scott with Charlene Dill's blood on his hands, as he's one of the people who died from the lack of the expansion of Medicaid in Florida. And we'll see where it goes. Congressman Mark Pocan with us, taking your calls. We'll be right back with more of your calls for the Congressman. Thank you so much for watching the Thom Hartmann Program, our program here on Free Speech TV. We really appreciate it. The main way that we support our program, that all of us who work here get our paychecks and that we keep the lights on and whatnot here, Free Speech TV does that by asking you to donate, a couple times a year, and that keeps Free Speech TV alive. We keep our show alive mostly, by advertising. We have advertisers who pay the bills. They support the program. And we've told you about some of them in the past, but really want to just move all that onto the internet. So if you would like to support our program by supporting our underwriters, our advertisers, you can go to thomhartmann.com. There's a complete list of them, or there will be soon, and just click on their little ads and find out what they have and be there for them and for us. Thank you so much. There we go. Welcome back. It's Middays with Mark, Congressman Mark Pocan, taking your calls. And JP in Bozeman, Montana, you are on the air with Congressman Pocan. Thanks for listening to Sirius XM.
Thanks, Tom. Hey, thank you, Congressman Pocan. I was just thinking that with this Chris Kobach debacle and people being expunged from the voter rolls, is it possible to create legislation that would ensure that every veteran and every active service member has their vote counted and is not knocked off the rolls? Because I'm thinking with all the people that they expunge, there has to be at least 5% of those people being expunged are veterans or service members. And that would keep people from, I would think that Republicans would have a hard time voting against that legislation.
Yeah, JP, the problem is they would never put it on the floor, which is our problem we have right now, which is why many of us are arguing to change the faces of the people in Congress so that if we're in the majority, we can do a lot around this, and a lot will be done. The Democrats have already put forward a proposal to deal with a lot of the election-related issues to make sure we have better security in our elections, and we would likely do that in the very first quarter of next year. So you're right. Veterans would be a way to approach it with Republicans, but the problem is Paul Ryan will never put it up for a vote, which has been the dysfunction we've had really since 2010. But Paul Ryan has taken it to a new class of dysfunction. Democrats want to do a bunch of these reforms and make sure that every person has that ability to vote, and I think you'll see a lot of that happen should the majority change.
Margie in Wisconsin Rapids, you are on the air with Congressman Mark Pocan.
Congressman Pocan, right now the Florida waters are dying, the West is burning, and Wisconsin is drowning. Two-part question. One, how do we address climate change, which is definitely feeding into this? And two, how do we address the Army Corps of Engineers, which does things like increase the levels of Lake Mendota, which when events happen like this, causes the flooding to be worse?
Yeah, so let me kind of answer the first one. I think it'd be more useful globally, and hopefully that incorporates some of the second question. Climate change is something that if anyone is still trying to pretend there's not a science to it, even though 98% of all the scientists who work in this area have told us there's climate change, it's ridiculous to pretend like it's not an issue, and we're seeing it in many levels, as you just mentioned and highlighted. In Wisconsin right now, we've got Tom, we had like 12 inches of rain last week in a short period of time that's been flooding much of very near my house, 10 minutes from my house. Black Earth and Mesa Maney really got hit. Cross Plains, Monona and Madison have been hit with the rising lake levels that have the aftermath of the rainfall. And we're clearly seeing those things across the globe, but especially across our country. And that's one where, President Trump has certainly been going in the wrong direction because the special interests want to continue making money the way they have, and they don't want to have to address this issue. Something Democrats, I think, are pretty unified behind, although I'll admit there are some Democrats, especially in oil-producing states, that aren't. But this is something I think also will be a priority should the majorities change.
Yeah. And I would say it's now 100% of credible climate scientists or actual climate scientists.
Right? I'm sure there's a few Republicans still holding out.
Yeah, I'm not seeing them. Congressman Mark Pocan taking your calls middays with Mark here on the Thom Hartmann Program.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
We'll be back with more of your calls for Congressman Pocan right after the news here at the bottom of the hour. We're reading today from Jason Stanley's book, How Fascism Works, The Politics of Us and Them. This is from chapter 1. It is only natural to begin this book where fascist politics invariably claims to discover its genesis, in the past. Fascist politics invokes a pure mythic past tragically destroyed. Depending on how the nation is defined, the mythic past may be religiously pure, racially pure, culturally pure, or all of the above. But there is a common structure to all fascist mythologizing. In all fascist mythic pasts, an extreme version of the patriarchal family reigns supreme, even just a few generations ago. Further back in time, the mythic past was a time of glory of the nation, with wars of conquest led by patriotic generals, its armies filled with its countrymen, able-bodied, loyal warriors whose wives were at home raising the next generation. In the present, these myths become the basis of the nation's identity under fascist politics. In the rhetoric of extreme nationalists, such a glorious past has been lost by the humiliation brought on by globalism, liberal cosmopolitanism, and respect for universal values such as equality. These values are supposed to have made the nation weak in the face of real and threatening challenges to the nation's existence. These myths are generally based on fantasies of a non-existent past uniformity, which survives in the traditions of the small towns and countrysides that remain relatively unpolluted by the liberal decadence of the cities. This uniformity, linguistic, religious, geographical, or ethnic, can be perfectly ordinary in some nationalist movements, but fascist myths distinguish themselves with the creation of a glorious national history in which the members of the chosen nation ruled over others, the result of conquests and civilization-building achievements. For example, in the fascist imagination, the past invariably involves traditional patriarchal gender roles. The fascist mythic past has a particular structure which supports its authoritarian hierarchical ideology. That past societies were rarely as patriarchal, or indeed as glorious, as fascist ideology represent them is beside the point. This imagined history provides proof to support the imposition of hierarchy in the present, and it dictates how contemporary society should look and behave. In a 1922 speech at the Fascist Congress in Naples, Benito Mussolini declared, "We have created our myth. The myth is a faith, a passion. It is not necessary for it to be a reality. Our myth is the nation. Our myth is the greatness of the nation. And to this myth, this greatness, which we want to translate into a total reality, we subordinate everything." Here, Mussolini makes clear that the fascist mythic past is intentionally mythical. The function of the mythic past in fascist politics is to harness the emotion of nostalgia to the central tenets of fascist ideology: authoritarianism, hierarchy, purity, and struggle. With the creation of a mythic past, fascist politics creates a link between nostalgia and the realization of fascist ideals. German fascists also clearly and explicitly appreciated this point about the strategic use of a mythological past. The leading Nazi ideologue, Alfred Rosenberg, editor of the prominent Nazi newspaper, the Völkischer Beobachter, writes in 1924, "The understanding of and the respect for our own mythological past and our own history will form the first condition for more firmly anchoring the coming generation in the soil of Europe's original homeland." The fascist mythic past exists to aid in changing the present. The patriarchal family is one ideal that fascist politicians intend to create in society, or return to, as they claim. The patriarchal family is always represented as a central part of the nation's traditions, diminished even recently by the advent of liberalism and cosmopolitanism. But why is patriarchy so strategically central to fascist politics? In a fascist society, the leader of the nation is analogous to the father in the traditional patriarchal family. The leader is the father of his nation, and his strength and power are the source of his legal authority, just as the strength and power of the father in the family in patriarchy are supposed to be the source of his ultimate moral authority over his children and wife. The leader provides for his nation, just as in the traditional family the father is the provider. The patriarchal father's authority derives from his strength, and strength is the chief authoritarian value. By representing the nation's past as one with a patriarchal family structure, fascist politics connects nostalgia to a central organizing hierarchical authoritarian structure, one that finds its purest representation in these norms. Gregor Strasser of the National Socialist Nazi Reich was the National Socialist Nazi Reich propaganda chief in the 1920s before the post was taken over by Joseph Goebbels. According to Strasser, for a man, military service is the most profound and valuable form of participation. For the woman, it is motherhood. Paula Seiber, the acting head of the Association of German Women, in a 1933 document meant to reflect official National Socialist state policy on women, declares that to be a woman means to be a mother, means affirming that the whole conscious force of one's soul, the value of being a mother and making it a law of life, the highest calling, is not just to bear children, but total devotion to her role. How Fascism Works is the book.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Congressman Mark Pocan on the line, taking your calls for the hour. Middays with Mark on the Thom Hartmann Program. And Bob in Jericho, New York, listening on Sirius XM. You are on the air with Congressman Mark Pocan. Bob? On Hybrid One, Sean? Nope, no Bob. Okay. Let's try Dave in Buffalo, New York. Dave, you're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Congressman Tom, thank you. In Afghanistan, China is building a military-style anti-terrorist camp with detention centers. China is also building a naval base in Gwadar Port in Afghanistan. China is building a military-grade weapons plant for the Afghan government. And China has been able to mount a cannon called the long gun on their ships, which has the force to take down any ship with one shot and has the accuracy to take down satellites. So if they were to put 100 of them in their country, they could eliminate with one shot the accuracy, take down all our satellites, and eliminate our ability to communicate. And I was wondering, what is your overarching view of this area, as well as when the Democrats take power, will we decide to get out of Afghanistan within a year, or are we doubling down and staying for 20? Thanks, Mark.
Yeah, well, Dave, thank you for your question. I mean, in general, in a lot of areas, including Afghanistan, I think we've often gone into areas where maybe we weren't the best people to be leading missions, and we stayed too long. And, I think I can't speak for where the Democrats will be if we win the House. Because we still have the Senate potentially. Unless we win the Senate, we still have a Republican president. So I'm not going to make a promise we're going to be able to withdraw the troops. But I do think a lot of us, especially in the Progressive Caucus, have talked about that, trying to reduce our footprint around the globe in many cases. And more often, if there are future areas that need to have intervening, we allow people in that region to take the lead, and we might provide some additional support, but we're not always taking the lead everywhere across the globe. I can't speak to what you mentioned about with China because I haven't seen those things. I apologize. But, I do think we still spend so much on our defense that instead could go to things like health care and other things that would benefit people right here in America. We would rather prioritize our funding on that, and I think that's a pretty universal position among progressives in Congress.
Jimmy in Arkadelphia, Arkansas. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Oh, yes. Hello, Tom and Congressman. How are you?
Good, Jimmy. Thank you.
The comment I wanted to make today was about Medicaid, and that is that the Republicans, they don't want to eliminate Medicaid. They just want it to be as small and dysfunctional and cover as few people as possible, because they know that if they eliminate it, that Medicare for all will fill that vacuum. And what do you think about that?
Jimmy, you bring up a good point, right? I mean, Republicans often say they want to get rid of programs, but actually they want to leave them lean enough that they can't actually do anything, and then they can blame them for not working, right? That's often their MO. And then, of course, the private sector or some special interest is the one to fill the void, so to speak. On Medicaid, unfortunately, a place like Wisconsin, our governor didn't do the Medicaid expansion, so we have a lot of people who are not benefiting from it. And bottom line is, we should be like Canada and most of Europe and, a lot of countries where it is pretty much a right of citizenship to have health care, period. And I think, personally, a Medicare for all system, to me, makes the most sense. But we've got to do something along those lines. And you're right. So often that's exactly what they want to do. Right now, healthcare the ACA has had death by 1,000 cuts, and now they're trying to claim it's not working. Well, it's because you broke it. And don't forget, Tom, I think this is important to remind people over and over, changes in the tax bill last year that took away the individual mandate are going to make everyone's health insurance increase in October from the upper single digits to double digits increase for everyone coming out in October, right before the elections, thanks to what the Republicans did when they were taking care of their corporate benefactors. So that is something to watch. And, I believe in the political adage that the last person to touch something owns it. And I think Donald Trump's tiny little hands are all over health care, so I think they're going to wind up paying for it. But unfortunately, we're all going to wind up paying for what they did last year.
Yeah. Patricia in Portage, Wisconsin, you're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Hey, Tom and Mark. I'm a journalist for the Cap Times, and I write about wildlife. They're about to kill 4,550 bears in the woods, mostly cubs, over packs of dogs next week. And I covered a biomass study of the Earth that shows that 60% of mammals on Earth are now livestock, 36% human, and 4% all the wild mammals left. We need the Endangered Species Act much, much stronger. We need our federal and state agencies funded on something other than killing wildlife in a mass extinction that's destroying our mammals, our large carnivores, are the balance of life, leaving us sick with Lyme disease, chronic wasting disease, all the diseases of imbalance that are going to only multiply 4%. All the wild mammals left on Earth is unsustainable and crashing. We need action on this now. As soon as you take power, you need to change these funding mechanisms.
Yeah, Patricia, I mean, on the Endangered Species Act, on the Antiquities Act, on a lot of the parks and natural lands we have, I mean, we need to have a different approach than we've had under the Republicans in Congress, and certainly this president who's made things even worse in all of those areas. So, we're down to the final 60-some days before the election. Hopefully, if people care about these issues and other issues, the natural recourse is to take a look at it in November. If you don't like what people are doing who represent you, change the faces of those people. But we need to take on all of those issues, and I'm hopeful that we can. But again, don't forget, there's still going to be someone else in the White House that may not be there, and it may not be quite as easy as we would all like to see it be.
Lee in Florida, you're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Yeah. I'm sorry. I'm on.
Yeah, you are, Lee.
Okay. Hey, by the way, Tom, I've held you for years being the epitome of progressive intelligence. It's an honor to actually finally speak with you.
Thank you.
But anyway, I saw the debate, the Democratic debate, and I agree with the congressman. Andrew Gillum was the most authentic person on that stage. So he won because in my estimate, he's a better candidate. But I did want to make a comment. I did see that commercial that the congressman referred to, where DeSantis was just slovenly, almost disgracefully sucking up to Trump with his whole family. Now, that commercial, the first time I ever saw that commercial was last night. So I'm assuming they were smart enough not to play that in South Florida, where it's more or less a Democratic haven. Now, the other thing I want to ask the congressman is Rick Scott, that disgusting governor, is running a commercial, believe it or not, on Bill Nelson's not paying taxes, of all things. So, I I find that to be just almost comical. So my question to you, if you guys do take control, will there be any movement on making Trump expose his tax liabilities or his taxes, period?
Hey, Lee, thanks for your call and thanks for your thoughts. I think you're right, first of all, in that commercial. They probably kept it for the most Republican areas because it did make me throw up a little in my mouth when I saw it. It was so over the top and bad, and I think they don't want everyone to see that, because who would want someone who is that close to the president and can't think for themselves? So I think you're right. I think we will do everything in power, because we took votes every single week for a while in the beginning to try to force the Republicans to make the president show his taxes, and they didn't. And I think it's a really important transparency thing. It should be nonpartisan. It's not a Democrat Democratic or Republican issue. It's whoever's in the White House. We need to know where their financial dealings are, where they're making money, and that's something every other president, Democrat or Republican, has done. So we need to make sure we get that done, and I think that would be a priority.
Doug, watching us on Free Speech TV in Morrison, Illinois. You are on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Good afternoon or good morning. Congressman Pocan?
Yes.
Have I got you?
Yeah, we're all here, Doug.
I'm here, Doug. Yep.
Okay. I just want to refer back to you were discussing making Social Security better for everybody, and I just want to put forth one model that could be used, and it works very well. It's worked for generations, and it's very solvent, and nobody can outlive it, and it's railroad retirement.
Well, Doug, I think one of the simplest things you can do, because there's no fundamental problem with Social Security to begin with, right? Other than currently with the fund, with the aging population, the amount of years left, the way we currently fund it is shorter than it should be. But we have not, whether it be adjusting to the last time it was increased or just lifting a cap completely, addressed that cap issue. The cap issue, and many people don't understand this, Tom, is the cap at, I think right now it's about $126,000. Once you make $126,000, you don't pay another dime into Social Security. In many ways, it's a regressive tax, because the more you make, the more you don't pay, where on your income, the more you make, the more you pay in as a percent even. Here, you actually quit paying into the fund. And if you just adjusted it, and there's some proposals to do that, or lifted the cap completely, you could add all kinds of life to that fund and, really let us figure out how to address those increases in a more humane way for seniors. My mother is 89, and on the floor of Congress, my first term, I put all of her expenses and showed what she gets a month. You just simply can't live on it, and we just need to do a better adjustment that takes into consideration what they spend on medication.
Amen. Congressman Mark Pocan taking your calls for the hour here on the Thom Hartmann Program. It's Middays with Mark. His website, pocan.house.gov. You can tweet him at @RepMarkPocan. We'll be back with more of your calls for Congressman Pocan in just a moment.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
It's 46 minutes past the hour. The Thom Hartmann Program, talk media for the sane among us. Back with more of your calls for Congressman Pocan in just a moment. And welcome back. Anita in San Antonio, Texas. You are on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Hi, Tom. Hi, Congressman. With all due respect, I'm sure this Andrew Gilliam is a fine man, but he does not remind me of Barack Obama. Beto O'Rourke reminds me of Barack Obama.
There's your Texas spirit. I agree. Beto came in my class 3 sessions ago, and, he is such a quality person. He's exactly the type of people you want to attract to politics. And, running for the U.S. Senate, I have had many conversations with him. The fact that he is going to every single county in Texas, Ted Cruz wants to be wined and dined by the upper establishment in the Republican Party. This is a guy who's, rolling up his sleeves and getting dirty and talking to folks and doing exactly what you want a candidate to do. So I agree. Beto is another great example. I just going to tell you, Andrew Gilliam, when I met him, is such an innovative and smart thinker. We can have more than one people across the country that are the future, and I think both of them are falling in that category.
I do agree. But I just think he has like that it factor, that kind of, and maybe I'm partial because he is from Texas, but by the same token, I just think he has that special factor that Barack Obama had that attracted a lot of people to him. But I do want to ask you one question. I know that a lot of people have said the Trump voters have economic anxiety, and that's what the majority of them voted for Trump, not because they're racist and misogynists and xenophobes, but because of this economic anxiety. But the problem I have with that, and the question I have to ask you, is if that is the case, why don't people of color, the majority of people of color, vote for Trump? They have more, the majority of them, they have a more economic anxiety relatively speaking, than a lot of these white Trump voters?
Yeah, no, great question. So let me give you Wisconsin as an example because we're a purplish state. Donald Trump narrowly won it by about 23,000 votes. I think now he's got the biggest drop-off of any state he won. His last approval in Wisconsin was 36%. 31% want him to run again. I found that very interesting. And, you know, we've lost a lot of jobs. My hometown, Kenosha, Wisconsin, 14,000 people at its peak used to make cars. No one does today. So, you know, he won Wisconsin and Michigan and Pennsylvania because of how he talked about trade. Of course, he's operating his trade policies, I think, in a very erratic way that don't necessarily represent that. But on top of it, I would argue much of his support does come from a racist basis. I mean, the rise of the Tea Party was about 50% racism because of Barack Obama getting elected, 50% of hardcore conservatism, and then it got fueled by Koch brothers and other people's monies, and then I think they created a Frankenstein they didn't quite know how to control. And, you know, here we are today. But I do think that a good chunk of the people who are still with Donald Trump are not because of his policies, because let's face it, this guy is incompetent is about the nicest thing I could say about him, and there's plenty more I should, but they're sticking with him because he's proven to be a racist in many of his actions, and I think that is a big chunk of the support he has. So if you're African-American or Latino and you're not doing well economically, you also know this guy will not do well for you in many other areas. So I think it's a compounding of those issues.
Yeah. We'll be back with Congressman Mark Pocan taking your calls for the hour, Middays with Mark, here on the Thom Hartmann Program. In just a moment, you can check out his website at pocan.house.gov. You can tweet him at Rep, as in Representative, Rep Mark Pocan, M-A-R-K-P-O-C-A-N. We'll be right back. It's coming up on 10 minutes before the hour. Thank you so much for watching the Thom Hartmann Program, our program here on Free Speech TV. We really appreciate it. The main way that we support our program, that all of us who work here get our paychecks and that we keep the lights on and whatnot here. Free Speech TV does that by asking you to donate, you know, a couple times a year, and you know, that keeps Free Speech TV alive. We keep our show alive principally, mostly, by advertising. We have advertisers who, you know, pay the bills. They support the program. And we've told you about some of them in the past, but really want to just move all that onto the internet. So if you would like to support our program by supporting our underwriters, our advertisers, you can go to thomhartmann.com. There's a complete list of them, or there will be soon, and just, you know, click on their little ads and find out what they have and be there for them and for us. Thank you so much. Congressman Mark Pocan on the line with us, taking your calls. Ashley in Vancouver, Washington, listening on X-Ray FM. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Hey, yes. I actually didn't really have a question. I'm just calling live from a teacher strike here in Vancouver. We're in day 2 of demanding our fair wages, and I just wanted to give kind of a shout out and kind of get your solidarity, because we're out here day 2, nothing from our district, on our feet all day, picketing for livable wages, and I just wanted to give that shout out to you guys.
Ashley, thank you for what you're doing, and you know, it's because of the movement that you're doing around the country that we've seen a lot of the fuel going into these governor's races. We have the opportunity to flip 10 governor's races this November, including my home state of Wisconsin, and a lot of the energy has been around education and the teacher strikes. And, you know, you may have saw Illinois recently, the legislature passed a bill, and the Republican governor just vetoed to try to move all teachers' starting salaries up to $40,000 at some point in the near future, and they still can't get that done. You know, what's more important than education and educating our children? And yet they've been so bad in so many areas in providing the funding. So thank you, one, for being a teacher, and two, thank you for, you know, doing what you're doing, fighting for your wages, because it's a movement overall. We need to make sure that everyone can lift their wages and take care of their families, and especially if you're taking care of our children, it's so very important.
Andy in Heron, Montana, watching us on Free Speech TV. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Hi, Congressman Pokin and Tom. This is another call about financial transparency. On the news a week or two ago, when they were first talking about the detentions of illegal aliens, I heard them say that they were paying $775 per person per day to the detention facilities. And then in reading Blackwater, I read that they're paying these mercenaries $600 to $800 or more per day. There seems to be no transparency to let the public what is going on in what seems to be some other sort of crony capitalism. And I'm wondering if there isn't a method for federal control of how much we're paying out of our tax dollars for these privatization of essential needs.
Yeah, where's William Proxmire when you need him, Congressman?
Yeah. I'll tell you, Andy, a great point. We've brought this up. You could stay at every Trump hotel in the country instead of what we're paying these contractors in order to house folks. But we wouldn't have to pay them to house folks at all if we just had a better immigration system, or we didn't abuse the system we have like this president has. So for all of the rhetoric from Republicans and from this president about being, good fiscal stewards, bull hockey, right? We can clearly show that that's not true in so many ways, and that's one great example of what a screwed up policy around immigration has done. It's costing us a lot of money, both in human terms and in tax dollars. And again, all the more reason why we need to have comprehensive immigration reform with a pathway to citizenship for aspiring Americans.
Grace in Detroit, watching us on YouTube. We have 2 minutes to the end of the hour, Grace. A quick question for Congressman Pocan?
The quick question is, last year, ALEC, Koch's group, and the Birchers were pushing for a resolution to repeal the 17th Amendment. Have you seen hide nor hair of that resolution, and how can we stop it?
This is direct election of senators.
Right.
Yeah, I haven't heard much, Grace. I think, ALEC and those groups work at the state legislative level, so I've been gone from that from 6 years ago, although I used to belong to ALEC just to get all their model legislation, give it to the progressive groups so we knew what they were up to, and did a lot of work around that in my years in the legislature. I have not seen a whole lot to give you a good status update, although, again, from that and the Constitutional Convention movement they're trying to usurp the majority on behalf of the special interests over and over and over again, and we just have to be very vigilant as they move these really bad ideas forward.
I'm waiting for them to start talking about repealing the 19th Amendment, reverse women's suffrage. It's bizarre. Congressman, in the final minute we have, your thoughts on the coming week, what we should be looking for, what we need to be doing?
Sure. So we're back in session in the House. The Senate, I guess, has kind of been in session through August. So, you've got one last kick at finding your local reps on Labor Day. Hopefully folks are reaching out at different Labor Day celebrations. Hopefully that makes us remember how important labor unions are to all of our selves, having the benefits we have, 40-hour work week, 5-day week, et cetera. And as we get back into session, I'm sure they're going to try to do a few things to save the November elections. Let's just not let them off the hook. Keep vigilant and keep the eye focused on 60-some days till we get to the election.
Yeah. So, and do you think that this blue wave is actually coming?
I do, based on all these state legislative flips that we've had, and people are fired up on our base. Their base is less fired up, and this non-political voter doesn't like the way the direction the country is. I think there's some real good opportunities if we all are active in the remaining weeks.
Amen. Congressman Mark Pocan, thank you so much, sir.
Sure. Thank you.
Great talking with you. Well, and hopefully we'll see you next week. We'll be back right after this.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
Thank you so much for watching the Thom Hartmann program, our program here on Free Speech TV. We really appreciate it. The main way that we support our program, that all of us who work here get our paychecks and that we keep the lights on and whatnot here. Free Speech TV does that by asking you to donate, a couple times a year, and that keeps Free Speech TV alive. We keep our show alive principally, mostly, by advertising. We have advertisers who, pay the bills. They support the program. And we've told you about some of them in the past, but really want to just move all that onto the internet. So if you would like to support our program by supporting our underwriters, our advertisers, you can go to thomhartmann.com. There's a complete list of them, or there will be soon, and just click on their little ads and find out what they have and be there for them and for us. Thank you so much.
It's the Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from Daring Democracy by Francis Moore-Lepay and Adam Eichen. This is from Chapter 1, What Will It Take? It's far too late and things are far too bad for pessimism, wrote author D. Hock in 1999, and we cheer in agreement. Yet we also know that in this treacherous time, it's really, really tough to stay true to this wise insight, and that's why we wrote this book. It's our way to find focus, energy, and honest hope. What has helped a lot is one realization. Despite the repeated refrain to the contrary, Americans are not fundamentally a divided people. In the 2016 election, what drew many to Donald Trump was his pledge to side with regular folks against the elite populating the swamp. At the same time, one thing repelled many people from him was fear that he would instead fill the swamp, accelerating the corporate takeover of our democracy. Our point is that Americans who are typically portrayed as being far apart were actually seeking a similar change. In fact, poll after poll shows striking common ground in our values as well as our vision of the democracy we want. With one big exception, surveys of the super rich show a huge chasm between their hopes for our country's direction and that of the rest of us. Our book is about building on what most of us share so that we can transform fear into action together. Action strong enough to get at the very roots of our historic crisis, that of the degradation and assault on democracy itself. In our opening note, we recounted a bit of our separate journeys leading to our initial encounter in 2015 at the first global conference on money and politics in Mexico City. There we found ourselves surrounded by multitudes gathered from dozens of countries, all devoting their lives to one shared insight: democracy is not a choice. Creating democracies truly accountable to their citizens is essential to our very survival, to the flourishing of societies supporting human life, and now, because of climate change, to the survival of the earth as we've inherited it. This is a colossal claim, we know, but there's one point in which human history makes us absolutely certain. It's not the magnitude of a challenge that crushes the human spirit. At our founding, farmers, shopkeepers, laborers, and slaves defeated an empire. Since then, black Americans risked their lives to fight against the subjugation of slavery and then for their democratic rights. Women fought for 7 decades to secure suffrage. In the 1930s, a democratic upsurge by workers led to the New Deal, which added basic protections of human dignity in the workplace and in old age. For millions, though, the promise of democracy remained unfulfilled. Soon thereafter, McCarthyism's witch hunts again dimmed our democracy, but brave Americans fought back. And by the 1960s, we began stepping up to halt an unwise war, demand civil rights protections, and embrace a war on poverty that by the early 70s had cut the poverty rate almost in half, lightning speed compared with the pace of most social change. Confronted with that which appears to be impossible, time and again, humanity has embraced the challenge with gusto, grit, and ultimately triumph. No, it's not a huge challenge that kills the spirit. What most defeats us is feeling useless, that we have nothing to say, nothing to contribute, that we don't count. A sense of futility is what destroys us. And it's precisely that emotional plague that today afflicts too many Americans across all political lines. Through our long social evolution, we humans have evolved as doers. We are problem solvers. If we were content to be whiners and couch potatoes, no doubt we could never have accomplished any of the human culture's vast achievements. Right now, though, many of us are filled with uncertainty about what to do, just as we most need all hands on deck.
So we wrote this book in part to help ourselves and others to rethink core assumptions that disempower us, specifically about the meaning and power of democracy. Often we hear that seeing is believing, but for humans in many ways it's the other way around. Believing is seeing. No less than Albert Einstein explained, it is theory which decides what can be observed. If we do not believe in the possibility of genuine democracy, we will not be able to see signs of it emerging. So it's become ever clearer to us that the possibility of creating a flourishing democratic society rests on whether enough Americans believe that it's achievable. Certainly we do. Yet to take on any mammoth undertaking, a belief in possibility is but one ingredient. To jump in wholeheartedly, most of us also need to feel in our bones that success is essential and that there's a way for us to make a real difference. Applied to democracy, success depends, therefore, on whether we can embrace three simple but powerful ideas. One, to fulfill every public need and to advance every public good, democracy is essential. None of our deepest needs can be served, nor are opportunities or threats met without it. Two, genuine democracy is possible. Here we mean real democracy, accountable to the people, not to narrow private interests. And three, there is a rewarding, even exhilarating role for each of us in making democracy real. As we will show in this book, a bipartisan democracy movement is emerging that's not about dutiful do-gooding. It meets deep emotional needs, and maybe it's even what our founders meant by our right to the pursuit of happiness. These core tenets are not taken on faith. They become real for us as we've continually tested them against our lived experiences and in our ongoing study. In this book, we hope you will become a believer as well. When we assert that democracy is essential, we mean that it's not just a good thing. It's the only approach to governance that brings forth the best of who we are. It's a great book, Daring Democracy. Check it out.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. On the line with us is Adam Tooze. He's a professor of history at Columbia University with a focus on economics and politics, the director of the European Institute, the author of several books, and his most recent, Crashed, How a Decade of Financial Crises Challenged the World. I bought this book a couple of months ago and read much of it, maybe most of it, over the last month or so, and it's absolutely fascinating. Adam Tooze, TOOZE.com is his website. You can tweet him at Adam_Tooze. Adam, welcome to the program. Professor Tooze, welcome to the program.
Hey, thank you for having me on.
Thank you for joining us. I found your book fascinating. The last chapter in particular, you talked about the concerns and issues around 1914. And you know, I'm assuming probably you were writing that around 2014, but maybe not. And how we're in some ways seeing history repeat itself, at least with regard to your concerns and those of many economists. Can you speak to that?
Yes, I mean, I think 1914 is an event that we've been arguing about for a century, and it seems to me to encapsulate many of the problems of the modern world, which are strikingly similar in some ways to what happened in 2008. And it's this weird way in which, on the one hand, the modern world generates enormous power structures which seem to be beyond the influence of any one individual, any one person, beyond democratic control as well. And then on the other hand, and precisely at the same time, they also create power structures which do enable individuals, largely men, generally of a particular class, to organize themselves and to exercise power in a very concerted way. And it's that weird kind of duality that I think the financial crisis of 2008 and the events leading up to the outbreak of World War I have in common.
I thought your characterization, detailed day by day, blow by blow, of the financial crisis of 2008 was brilliant. I'm curious your thoughts now, having written the book and having published it and all, and time has passed. To what extent do you think that we actually have resolved the issues that provoked the George W. Bush, I refer to it as the Great Republican Crash of 2007, 2008, but if you want to take the partisanship out of it, fine. But to what extent are we not out of the woods with regard to that crash? To what extent are we still in that crash even?
I mean, I think we're out of the crash, but I mean, to use another analogy, we haven't fundamentally changed the vehicle. We've added seatbelts, we've added a guidance system, we've got better brakes on the system, maybe. But the vehicle itself is the same rickety old, high-speed death trap that it always has been, and it's most likely to generate crises in future as well. Whether they'll take the precise form that they did in 2008, I think, is an open question. But we do have slightly more security devices on the system, and we also have a certain amount of experience with dealing with it when it goes off the road. But it isn't in any fundamental way safer than it was before the crisis.
The issues that provoked the last crisis, the collateralization of mortgages. We're seeing this repeated now. Subprime mortgages are again hot. Subprime auto loans are hot. We've got over $1.5 trillion in the student loan market. A great piece in the Washington Post today about how Betsy DeVos could be provoking the next international financial crisis by winding back the regulation of the for-profit educational institutions and bringing back one of the most corrupt of the agencies that certifies educational institutions in a way that makes them eligible for federal funds. What are the things that you see that might provoke a crisis? What are the things that we should be looking for, with your historian and economist's eyes?
Yeah. I mean, I think you're looking for three things, and I don't quite see them coming together yet, not in the United States. You're looking for an asset class which is overpriced, a bubble-type asset, which will suddenly lose value. So student loans might fit that bill, or high-yield bonds in the corporate sector. But then you're also looking for those to be part of the balance sheets of vulnerable financial institutions, and they really need to be massively over-leveraged and short-term funded. And it was the fact that all those three things came together in 2008 that produced this epic banking meltdown on both sides of the Atlantic. Right now, I think we've got pieces of that story, but it's only really in China that you really see all three of them coming together. And the authorities there are really working very hard to defuse what everyone I can see as a time bomb. In the US, we have elements of the story, but not really the three bundled together, where you've got Citigroup, a $2 trillion bank with a huge amount of short-term funding holding, a couple of $100 billion worth of exposure to very bad mortgages. We don't quite have that combination yet in the current situation. We've certainly got the makings of a bad case of the flu in the United States economy. I'm not sure that we've got the makings of a heart attack.
Is it possible that asset class could be stocks? I mean, stocks are more overvalued now than they were in 2008.
Yeah, but they're not held. They're not held on the balance sheets of banks in the way that the fixed income securities were before 2008. So that's, I think, really the danger sign. When those three things come together, then all the lights are blinking red, and people should really, really pay attention.
What's the difference between the way that the United States has responded to this and other countries around the world? You mentioned China. What countries are doing a good job of battening down the hatches, of solving the problems that provoke these kind of crises, and what countries are doing the worst jobs? And what can we learn from both?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say I give the U.S. kind of a middling grade, to be honest. I mean, they moved quite quickly to recapitalize the American banks. Now, that's not, doing taxpayers any favors. In the end, they did make a decent return on the investment, but that's really in the interest of bank shareholders. Banks should have been properly capitalized in the first place. But getting them to the place where they are well capitalized is a step in the direction of stability. I mean, the people who really lagged behind were the Europeans, where you've still got banks like Deutsche Bank, systemically important financial institutions, currently rated the most dangerous bank in the world. The Chinese authorities characteristically seem to just quite uninhibitedly be going about squashing the shadow banking sector right now because they just think it's dangerous. How far they're succeeding at that, We don't really know. Beijing was obviously rather opaque, but they at least are doing the kind of preemptive action that no one in the West was doing before 2007-8. So I'd give the U.S. a kind of middling score above the Europeans, but historically speaking, Beijing is moving more quickly than any of us in the West did before 2008.
Howe and Strauss wrote a book years ago, back in the late 90s, titled The Fourth Turning, and they pointed out that roughly every 80 years, leveraging Arnold Toynbee's great quote that when the last man who remembers the horrors of the last Great War dies, and that memory is lost to society, the horrors of that war, the next great war becomes inevitable. And what they pointed out is that roughly every 80 years we have a massive financial crisis followed by a great war. In 1929, followed by World War II. The Great Crash of 1856, followed by the Civil War. The Great Crash of 1770, followed by the American Revolution. They literally take this back to the 16th century. And I'm wondering if you see any cycles of history in this. I mean, you were talking about 1914. 1914, of course, was followed by World War I. And there are many people out there, foreign policy experts, Zbigniew Brzezinski, before he died, was talking about this a lot, who are pointing out that the interlocking relationships that many of the countries around the world have, mutual defense relationships, are structurally very similar to what we had in 1914 in many regards. And that, a small incident like the assassination of Archduke Ferdinand could trip something off, or something economic could trip off a war-type event. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think historians generally come in different flavors. Some are more of the cyclical repetition type flavor. Personally, I'm more of a hockey stick kind of guy. In other words, I think modern history departs in really fundamental ways, and by modern I really mean 20th century, and indeed even I think you might say late 20th century. History departs in quite fundamental ways from the past. That's not necessarily an optimistic view. You take, say, the environmental question. Nothing in human history prepares us for what's coming our way in the next 50 years in terms of human-induced climate change. I tend to think of global capitalism as operating with a similar dynamic. And if you add atomic weapons into the story, then I think you similarly could claim there's a discontinuity. I mean, if we have another war like World War II, with all likelihood will, extinguish human life on the planet. So it won't be another one of the 80-year crises. The sort of place where you might see that kind of tension building up, it would seem to be most obviously East Asia. That's where there's a real great power confrontation. And the Trump administration seems bent, and not just the Trump administration, but the American security apparatus behind Trump, which probably would have backed up Hillary Clinton as president as well, seems bent on escalating tension with China, a regime which is quite manifestly committed to nationalism as an organizing ideology to hold the mass base of the Chinese regime together. That, I think, is a very difficult and dangerous situation. We already saw in 2014, under the Obama administration, how tense things got between Japan and China. I think that's a really worrying scenario. Whether or not, it ever gets to the point of an actual military confrontation, that's too hard to predict or foretell. But I think if you're looking for that kind of scenario, that's where you would look.
Fascinating stuff. Adam Tooze, professor of history at Columbia University. His new book, Crashed, How a Decade of Financial Crises Changed the World. Adam Tooze, TOOZE.com, the website. You can tweet him at Adam_Tooze. Professor Tooze, thanks so much for being with us today.
Oh, thank you for having me on.
It's been great talking with you. It's an extraordinary and fascinating book and well worth the read. We'll be right back. It's 17 minutes past the hour.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Back with more of the news of the day, and boy, is there a bunch of it, and your calls right after this. And welcome back. Cliff in Canyon Country, California, watching us on Free Speech TV. Hey, Cliff, what's on your mind today?
Morning, Tom.
Morning.
Hey, have you ever considered trying out to be a contestant on Jeopardy?
No. I have no interest.
I think you do real well.
I do a pretty good job of playing Trivial Pursuit until we get to the sports questions or the entertainment questions, in which case I always need to have a teammate because I'm hopeless. But anyway, what's up, Cliff?
I'd like to think that karma's at play here with that orange mess. You know, you spend your whole life as a con man, rip-off artist, screwing people. It's going to come back and bite you one day, and I think that's what's happening.
Yeah. Yeah, I think karma is a good description of, what seems to be happening. I hope it plays out. It's because Trump has had the Midas touch his whole life,
Exactly.
Just like Reagan did.
It's about time. Anyways, I know that we have this news cycle every day. We have the tweets. We're having trials. We have these sorry White House briefings with Sarah Sanders. These things get covered, but they're soon forgotten. They're replaced by the next story or the next tweet. So in the big picture, they're not really that significant. The biggest story in the world, it's happening right now, every day around the world, and it's virtually ignored by the corporate media, is this climate disruption, this global climate disruption. And I think it's really dangerous to not inform all humanity about it and try to implement all solutions immediately. I mean, we're putting this thing under the rug. We're going to look back on this years from now and ask, what were you doing? This is the most dangerous thing to humanity, to our civilization. Like you've said, the planet will probably survive, but we're in a extinction. And while to make it partisan is also very dangerous, because hurricanes and floods and wildfires, they don't really care about the house they're going to destroy if it's a Republican or a Democrat. We're all in this together, and I want to know why there's more elected officials don't call out, the James Inhofes of the world and any vocal climate change denier and put them on blast. Call them out now, because at this point they don't have to explain themselves. They're getting off scot-free, and we're being threatened by this. I just think it's time to put this on the forefront. It's the most important issue to all people on this planet. And
one of the things that's driving that, Cliff, and I think it's really important to note, is that climate change had pretty much not affected the weather until the last 15 years or so, and now it's starting to be really obvious because it's breaking up the jet stream. And as the jet stream collapses, we end up with weather systems that used to pass through in a day that now linger for a week or a month. And so, a hot day becomes a drought and a wet day becomes a flood, whereas it didn't before. And I think that people all across the country, obviously all around the world, they're talking about this, but we don't talk about it here in our news. Even our weather people don't talk about it, but people are figuring it out. I got cab drivers talking to me about this kind of stuff.
Well, and the fact that the Arctic is warming at such a rapid rate compared to the rest, and that just is going to multiply things with the sea ice going away, not reflecting the sun. Instead, the oceans are going to get warmer because there's less ice. And the methane release.
Yeah, I think we're looking at some really radical change, and particularly with the El Nino's coming. So the next couple of years are going to be warmer than normal. In addition to 5 of the hottest years in human history have been in the last 5 years. Cliff, thanks for the call. We'll be back. Thank you so much for watching the Thom Hartmann Program, our program here on Free Speech TV. We really appreciate it. The main way that we support our program, that all of us who work here get our paychecks and that we keep the lights on and whatnot here, Free Speech TV does that by asking you to donate, a couple times a year, and that keeps Free Speech TV alive. We keep our show alive mostly, by advertising. We have advertisers who pay the bills. They support the program. And we've told you about some of them in the past, but really want to just move all that onto the internet. So if you would like to support our program by supporting our underwriters, our advertisers, you can go to thomhartmann.com. There's a complete list of them, or there will be soon, and just click on their little ads and find out what they have and be there for them and for us. Thank you so much. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. I mentioned on Monday that Louise and I were up in Canada, in Victoria specifically, the capital of British Columbia, which I did not know until I was there.
I guess I just always assumed that Vancouver was the capital, but it's on Vancouver Island. But in any case, we were there for the weekend for our daughter's wedding, one of our daughter's weddings. And one of the things that I thought was absolutely fascinating that we first noticed in the airport, and then, you know, walking around the city, we spent a lot of time Saturday, as I recall, maybe Friday, you know, downtown, sitting in outdoor cafes, you know, just having a glass of wine and a snack and talking. It was just a wonderful trip, you know, and hanging out with our whole family. But one of the things that I really noticed was that I didn't see, I want to say any, there might have been one or two that were the exception, but I didn't see any of the kind of obesity that you see in the United States. And I was scratching my head. I mean, you know, Canadians don't like walk a lot more. And in fact, one of the things we're finding is that exercise doesn't have, you know, it has huge impacts on your health, but it doesn't have that much impact on your weight. It's mostly diet. And so I started looking at the ingredients on foods. You know, get a soft drink. It's made with sugar, not high fructose corn syrup. And that reminded me of the news report that I shared with you a week and a half ago, that they've now learned that high fructose corn syrup suppresses the body's ability to respond to leptin. Leptin is a hormone that your body produces in response to, I think the word is pronounced satiety, S-A-I, being full, right? When you know that you're full, when you're sated, when your body is full, your body produces this hormone leptin that shuts down the hunger response. But high fructose corn syrup suppresses that, and so if you have high fructose corn syrup along with a meal or in the hours preceding a meal, you don't know when to stop eating. And which takes us back to Earl Butz. Earl Butz was the agriculture secretary under Ronald Reagan. And Earl Butz wanted to, his job, his assignment from Reagan was to take the great Midwest, which was very liberal, right, very progressive at the time. The Farm Labor Party up in Minnesota is legendary, for example, to take that Midwest and turn it Republican. And the way he did this was by massive supports, massive subsidies for the growing, in particular of corn. Corn and soybeans were the two big ones. And it produced a glut in the corn market. And in the 70s, Japanese scientists had figured out how to take corn and convert it into high fructose corn syrup, which is not something that occurs in nature. It's a man-made chemical. It's made out of corn, but it's a chemical. And use it as a sweetener. And so Earl Butz championed that, and we got high fructose corn syrup in the 80s, and toward the late 80s, Coke put it in, and then all the other soft drinks did, and thus began our obesity epidemic. And just going to Canada for 4 days was just, or 5 days, whatever it was just a shock to me of how different Canadians look from Americans. And I think this is being done to us, another legacy of the Reagan era. I mean, you know, it's you know, they wanted to pour all this cash on the Midwestern farmers so they'd all love Reagan, and they also wanted to cut the knees out, you know, cut the legs out at the knees from under the southern countries, the Central American, South American, and Cuba. Cuba wasn't importing in the United States at the time, but basically they wanted to destroy the sugar industry outside the United States, and they accomplished both. And we're left with you know, heart disease and type 2 diabetes. We'll be back.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
And then on top of that, today's Washington Post, could increased antidepressant use be contributing to the global obesity problem? I'll tell you about that after the break, and we'll pick up your phone calls. Welcome to the Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from Settlers, The Mythology of the White Proletariat, The True Story of the White Nation by J. Sakai, published by Morningstar Press in 1989. This is from Chapter 2, The Foundations of Settler Life.
The life of European settlers and the class structure of their society was abnormal because it was dependent upon a foundation of conquest, genocide, and enslavement. The myth of the self-sufficient white settler family clearing the wilderness and supporting themselves through their own initiative and hard labor is a propaganda fabrication. It is the absolute characteristic of settler society to be parasitic, dependent upon the super-exploitation of oppressed peoples for its style of life. Never has Euro-American society completely supported itself. This is the decisive factor in the consciousness of all classes and strata of white society from 1600 to now. Settler society was raised up above the level of backward old Europe by a foundation of conquest. This conquest was a miracle drug for a Europe convulsed with the reaction of decaying feudalism and deadly capitalism. Shot into the veins of the Spanish feudal nation, for instance, the miracle drug of the New World conquest gave Spain the momentary power to overrun North Africa, Holland, and Italy before her historical incident waned. Like many such fixes for Euro-Americans, this conquest was addicting. It was habit-forming and rapidly indispensable, not only culturally, but in the mechanism of an oppressor society whose lifeblood was new conquest. We'll examine this later in the relationship of settlerism to imperialism. For now, it's enough to see that this conquest is a material act of great magnitude, an economic and social event as important as the emergence of the factory system or the exploitation of petroleum in the Middle East. We stress the obvious here because the Euro-American settlers have always made light of their invasion and occupation, although the conquered territory is the precondition for their whole society. Traditionally, European settler societies throw off the propaganda smoke screens that they didn't really conquer and dispossess other nations. They claim with false modesty that they merely moved into vacant territory. So the early English settlers depicted America as empty, a howling wilderness, unsettled, sparsely populated, just waiting with a vacant sign on the door for the first lucky civilization to walk in and claim it. Theodore Roosevelt wrote defensively in 1900, quote, "The settler and pioneer have at bottom had justice on their side. This great continent could not have been kept as nothing but a game preserve for squalid savages," end of quote. It is telling that this lie is precisely the same lie put forward by white Afrikaner settlers who claim that South Africa was literally totally uninhabited by any Africans when they arrived from Europe. To universal derision, these European settlers claim to be the only rightful historic inhabitants of South Africa. Or we can hear similar defenses put forward by the European settlers of Israel, who claim that much of the Palestinian land and buildings they occupy are rightfully theirs, since the Arabs had allegedly decided to voluntarily abandon it all during the 1948-49 war. Are these kinds of tales any less preposterous than those put forward by Euro-American settlers? America was spacious and sparsely populated only because the European invaders destroyed whole civilizations and killed off millions of Native Americans to get the land and profits they wanted. We all know that when the English arrived at Virginia, for example, they encountered an urban, village-dwelling society far more skilled than they were in the arts of medicine, agriculture, fishing, and government. This civilization was reflected in a chain of 300 Indian nations and peoples stretching from the Arctic Circle to the tip of South America, many of whom had highly developed societies. There was, in fact, a greater population in these Indian nations in 1492 than in all of Western Europe. Recent scholarly estimates indicate that at the time of Columbus, there were 100 million Indians in the hemisphere, 10 million in North America, 25 million in Central Mexico, and an additional 65 million elsewhere in Central and South America. These numbers have long been concealed since they give rise to the logical question of what happened to this great mass of people. The European invaders, Spanish, Dutch, English, Portuguese, and French, simply killed off millions and millions to safeguard their conquest of the land and provide the disposable slave labor they needed to launch their new world. Conservative Western historical estimates show that the Spanish reduced, in quotes, the Indian population of their colonies from some 50 million to only 4 million by the end of the 17th century. And from the 10 million Indians who once inhabited North America, after 4 centuries of settler invasion and rule, there were in 1900 perhaps 200,000 to 300,000 surviving descendants in the United States. This was the very substantial down payment towards the continuing blood price that third world nations have to pay to sustain the Euro-American way of life. So when we hear that the settlers pushed out the Indians, or forced the Indians to leave their traditional hunting grounds. We know that these are just code phrases to refer politely to the most barbaric genocide imaginable. It could well be the greatest crime in all of human history. Only here, the Adolf Eichmanns and Heinrich Himmlers had names like Benjamin Franklin and Andrew Jackson. The point is that genocide was not an accident, not an excess, not the unintended side effect of virile European growth. Genocide was the necessary and deliberate act of the capitalists and their settler shock troops. The book Settlers. So just when I think I've got things figured out, somebody comes along and says, no! I love it. I actually appreciate being corrected. And who knows? Lauren sent me a note, says, as a Canadian, I was surprised to hear your theory about obesity in Victoria. I haven't been there in years and don't know about their obesity, but here in Alberta, obesity and the consequences are rampant. As for high fructose corn syrup, it's prevalent in Canada as in the U.S., especially since much of our processed food comes from the U.S. Coke has it for sure. Perhaps you were in some bubble of thin people. I'm visiting my son right now in Redmond, Washington, and people seem very thin here. Perhaps it has to do with income. People in Victoria are wealthy enough to live in a very expensive city, and here in Redmond, many work in the tech industry and are wealthy. You know, that probably has a lot to do with it. And thank you, Lauren, for that. It is, however, I mean, maybe it was just, you know, the wonderful soft drinks I was trying, but I didn't see any high fructose corn syrup in anything. The other story that I wanted to share with you is this piece from the Washington Post. It's from the Wellness Perspective blog today. And a study was done at King's College in London, looking at a British database. And they start out by noting that the two countries in the world that have the highest rates of obesity are the United States and the United Kingdom. And Britain and the United States have similar obesity rates, the highest in the world. In the United States, that would be the developed world, I'm assuming. In the United States, antidepressant use has climbed 65% since 1999. They looked at 300,000 clinical records of adults whose body mass index were measured at least 3 times for this study. 53,000 adults in the British database with an average age of 51.5 had been prescribed antidepressants for the first time during this 8-year study. And what they found was during those 8 years that those 53,000 adults who were prescribed antidepressants for the very first time were more likely, far more likely, to gain more than 5% of their body weight than those who were not on the antidepressants. The study team concluded, quote, widespread utilization of antidepressants may be contributing to long-term increased risk of weight gain. I just find the whole thing fascinating. I have been experimenting on my own body with diet and a little bit of exercise. You know, I try to walk a couple miles a day, but I've been pretty much entirely vegan for the last couple of years, vegetarian since I was 16. But when we were in Cuba for that week, I was eating fish on a regular basis because the meals were, okay, do you want the pork, the beef, or the fish? And that was my choice. And my blood pressure when I came back was like averaging 165 over 110, which is like really high for me. It's really high for anybody. And after about, you know, so my doctor, you know, cranked up my blood pressure medication, but after 2 or 3 weeks, it went back down again to the point that I had to cut my blood pressure medication down to almost nothing because I'd gone back to being vegan. And then a couple of weeks ago, I just broke down and it was like there was some really good cheddar cheese, and I used to just love cheese. And so, you know, I bought a couple of squares of it, and I've been eating it for a week, and guess what? You know, this morning my blood pressure was 20 points higher than it normally is, again. And you know, this is not scientific, obviously, it's just me experimenting with my body, but most people don't spend years as essentially vegans and then break that and then see what happens. So, you know, I offer this as a interesting experiment that may have nothing to do with you or your body because everybody, you know, we're all unique in some ways, but I'm just finding this whole thing fascinating. Anyhow, And the antidepressant thing I thought was particularly fascinating because the United States and the UK have the worst levels of inequality in the developed world. And we know that there's a direct, almost a one-to-one correlation, this from the study by the enormous amount of research done by Richard Wilkinson and Kate Pickett for their books, Why Inequality Matters and The Spirit Level. And you can find all this on their website. And what they found was that the worse inequality was, the worse a whole variety of social ills were, including divorce rates, teenage pregnancy, sexually transmitted diseases, suicides, homicides, gun violence, crime, and obesity was among those things as well. And other diseases actually go up with inequality. And you wonder if the antidepressants are causing the weight gain or if they are people who are so stressed by inequality. I mean, the major thing that damages relationships, particularly marriages, is fighting over money. And those fights are much more likely to happen when people don't have decent incomes and don't have, social security systems. Is there a relationship there? So anyhow, I just put that out. We don't need to talk about it. I just wanted to share what I've been thinking about here a lot with you recently. Rick in Southeast Texas, it says here you're a Republican. Do I have that right? What's up?
Yes.
What's on your mind, Rick?
Sure am. Well, I mean, y'all just want to bash Trump. And let me say this, there's a lot of things that have happened. The Clintons, when they left the White House the last time, stole all those items, historical items. They had to go back and get them back.
No, actually, that never happened, Rick. That never happened. That was a lie that was promoted by a right-wing blog. Rick, you're going to try and talk over me. It's not going to work. If you want to have a rational conversation, call back, but it doesn't seem you're inclined. That whole story of the Clintons taking things out of the White House was a lie. And, just like the story that they had taken all the W's off the keyboards was a lie. I mean, this whole myth of conservative victimization is pathetic. You snowflakes, you got to get over this stuff. Rich in Central Woolley, Washington. Hey, Rich, what's on your mind?
Hey, Tom, now that you've got family up in Victoria, maybe we can have you swing by Bellingham someday on your way through.
Uh-huh. No, I don't have family there. We just had a wedding there, actually.
Okay. Yeah. Well, still, come on up to Bellingham. But, yeah, my point here today was that the attack words coming from the right are like, talking about extreme left, socialist, free stuff, and how are you going to pay for it? And I want to actually get to Congressman Pocan and say, how are we going to address a generation that was raised in the Reaganomics bubble and explain to them that actually we and these candidates are more like center-left FDR Democrats and not these scary socialist far-left words.
I would say you asked the question, how's that working out for you, that Reaganomics thing? It's prior to the 80s, working people in this country, and I grew up in blue-collar southern Lansing, Michigan. My dad worked in a tool and die shop, and most of my friends' parents worked at Oldsmobile. And people knew which side their bread was buttered on. They knew that the Democratic Party stood for labor and the Republican Party stood for big business. There was no disputing that. And Reagan came along and captured the imagination. I mean, he was a very good actor. He was a very good performer. And he captured the imagination of a lot of people and convinced them that the language that the billionaires use, billionaires are concerned about their taxes going up because it means their income goes down. When average working people's taxes go up, their income actually goes up. And I've ranted about that in the past. Unless somebody doesn't know what I'm talking about, call in and I'll explain it to you. But that's the actual dynamic. And
I'm just not hearing the pushback from our side. Say, no, it's not really socialist. Social democracy maybe, or it's FDR democracy. They're just getting bowled over by all the, it's free stuff. It's for the socialist Democrats just want to give you free stuff. And how are you going to pay for it? Nobody can tell us how to pay. Well, let's start telling them how we're going to pay for it.
Yeah, it's very simple. You go back to taxing the rich. I mean, it's very simple, and that's why the rich are funding all these shills. You know, that's why a billionaire like Rupert Murdoch funded Fox News and lost, you know, $100 million a year for 5 years on Fox News before he got the thing launched and up and running. Because, you know, hey, it's a major investment of the billionaire class to convince people that thinking like a billionaire is the best way to be. And so, yeah, I think your point is well made, Rich. Very well made. In fact, Stephen in Airmont, New York. Hey, Stephen, thanks for listening to Sirius XM. What's up?
You know, that's a perfect meeting. You know, people don't understand, you know, that there's a phrase, some people may not be, a dime a dozen. Eggs were a dime a dozen. You know, eggs were a dime a dozen because the gap between the richest and the poorest for many years in this country was not what it is now.
Right.
And this is what I'm going to say. You know, the latest tax scam that has been perpetrated on the people of this country, okay, is going to result. It's going to make 2008 look like a walk in the park, okay? And this is what we were sold. Tell me if we were sold on this, that a 40% tax cut to corporations was going to mean higher wages. You're going to get, you know, and lower prices. Things are going to cost.
Right, and neither one happened. What happened was
not even close. It's not only that, but you know how many people have had their crappy 401ks converted to a traditional pension plan because of this unbelievably this wonderful tax cut. No, you're right. That's what we have to do. We do have to go back to tax. I don't even believe that Stephen Mnuchin. And you know what? You know why Stephen Mnuchin's not afraid of any of this stuff? Because he saw how much money he profited on the way down.
Yeah, no, he's insanely rich. it's you know, and bizarre, by the way. Stephen, thank you for the call. We're going to check in with Talk Media News in a few minutes, find out what's going on in the world, check in on the news, and then we'll get back to your calls and also Michael D. Antonio.
To Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archive.
At the top of the next hour, by the way, Michael D. Antonio is going to be with us. He's written a book, The Truth About Mike Pence. Should be fun. And welcome back. Brian in Edgewater, Florida, watching us on YouTube. Hey, Brian, what's up?
Hey, how you doing, Tom?
Great. What's on your mind?
Hey, I just wanted to talk about Andrew Gillum winning in Florida yesterday. Huge victory. He came out of nowhere. Polls down here even had him down about like 10 to 15% even just a week ago.
Yeah.
And just wanted to get the word out that everybody in Florida needs to go out and vote for him. He's a fantastic candidate. And his opponent, DeSantis, he's just a Trump lackey. That's the best way I can put it.
Yeah.
I don't know. Have you seen his campaign ads that he's run down here?
I've seen DeSantis's ones. They've been picked up by the national media where he's building the wall with his little kid and reading him the book about how wonderful Donald Trump is. I have not seen any Andrew Gillum. It's Andrew, right?
Yes, Andrew.
Yeah, Andrew Gillum ads. He's relatively new to me. Well, he's totally new to me. He was not on my radar until yesterday. So.
Yeah, Bernie endorsed him about a month ago, which I think was a huge push. But he hasn't run any TV ads or anything. But like I said, any help is needed because it's going to be a tough race the next couple months.
Yeah.
He needs as much help as he can get.
Amen. Well said. Brian, thanks a lot for the call. And I totally agree. James in St. Petersburg, Florida. Hey, James, what's on your mind?
Yeah. Hi, Tom.
Hi. Thanks for watching Free Speech TV. What's up? We got 2 minutes before the break.
Okay, Tom. I just wanted to quickly say that if scientists were to unanimously preclude that there was an asteroid, say the size of Mount Everest, which hit near the Yukon, I believe, and knocked out the dinosaurs and everything, we'd be tremendously upset, and there'd probably be a worldwide effort to diffuse it, get it out of the way from hitting our planet.
Right, and climate change is that.
We're we're being told the same thing with climate change, and yet collectively the world is doing nothing.
Well, the difference is that what we're being told with climate change is it's not going to happen in your lifetime. And whereas the asteroid, that would be in your lifetime, which scares the bejesus out of people. And I think that what's happening with the weather now as the result of the jet stream collapsing is actually causing people to realize this is going to happen in your lifetime.
Well, yeah, it is. As a matter of fact, I'm 74, and I believe that it's going to happen in my lifetime.
I think it's happening right now, right in front of us.
Exactly, I do too. You know, I called into your show quite a while ago. It's been maybe a year or so ago. And I suggested that there were a couple of people you had never discussed. One was Stanley Milgram. You might remember.
Yeah.
And
his experiments on the willingness of people to torture other people.
Exactly. And I remember in 1969 or 70 when I was in college, there was an article in Esquire magazine that said, if Hitler were to ask you to murder someone, would you? And the answer was probably.
Yeah.
And that was very, very frightening. And,
well, you know, history proves it right.
What's that?
History proves it right.
Yeah. And also, again, you got to look at John B. Calhoun with his behavioral theory.
I got to, you know, yeah, good point, James. Thank you for the call. We'll be right back. We're going to check in with Talk Media News. Ellen Ratner will be with us in just a moment, right after this. Welcome back. Let's check in with Talk Media News, find out what's going on in the world today. This report brought to you by goatsfortheoldgoat.com and Loving What You Do, Ellen Ratner's new book. And on the line with us is Ellen Ratner herself. And happy birthday yesterday, Ellen.
Thank you so much, and I really appreciate that. I'm an old bat, but, you know, that's why we have Goats for the Old Goat, because I'm old.
Well, it started out as your birthday thing, wasn't it, as I recall?
It did, for my 60th birthday, but that was a long time ago because I'm an old bat.
Yeah. Welcome to the club.
Okay.
Okay, so what's up?
Thank you. Well, so what's really interesting, and I know you've been talking about, because I heard it, the Florida governor's election and DeSantis versus Andrew Gillum. But what's really interesting is DeSantis got up today on news, on one of the news channels, and said, don't let anybody monkey this up.
Right.
And, I mean, it's shocking, actually, that he said that, and he's getting a lot of pushback from it, and he should.
He also said Gillum was articulate, you know, which is the old, this is what got Joe Biden, the trope that black people are not articulate, and, you know, it's just, yeah.
Give me a break.
Yep.
Okay, so the big news today is that the White House counsel is leaving, supposedly after the Kavanaugh gets nominated to the Supreme Court. His name is Don McGahn, and he actually threatened to leave if Donald Trump fired the White House counsel, the special counsel, Mueller. So we don't know whether he was asked to leave or whether he is leaving on his own or whatever, and we may not know that for a long time, but that's the story.
Yeah. Okay.
Now, also in Florida's 27th district, Donna Shalala won, and she won the Democratic nomination. She is almost 10 years older than Ross Layton, who is resigning. Ross Layton was the Republican. Now, it's interesting. The Democrats feel that this is a definite pickup seat, that they can win this, and that Donna Shalala, who was HHS secretary and also president of the University of Miami or Florida or something like that. I can't remember. But she is the person that's running. So that's very interesting. Okay, in Arizona, now we have David Garcia, who's running for governor. And if so, he would be the first Latino in like 40 years or something that has a public office like governor.
Mm-hmm.
Now, also, it's very interesting, Martha McSally, who was the year after Shalene at the Air Force Academy, won her seat very easily. She won against Governor, not Governor, Arpaio, the sheriff.
Right.
And what's very interesting about that is that the governor he can make an appointment to McCain's seat for almost 2 years. Now, McSally is running, and she will be running against another member of Congress, Kirsten Sinema. And Kirsten, by the way, is the only openly gay, bisexual member of Congress. So the two of them are going to be neck and neck in that race. That is going to be a very, very interesting race. A lot of people are saying McSally is going to win it hands down, but we just don't know about that.
Yeah, I wouldn't take anything for granted this year.
I would not. Okay, now what's really interesting is Google, who was in trouble with Donald Trump yesterday because he tweeted out something, but they're also in trouble for a reasonable reason, in my view, and that is that they might be willing to X out some of what they have in China, so that whatever shows up on the internet in China could be decided on by the government.
Yeah, they've been getting serious blowback from their own employees about this project that they've been running for some months now to come up with a Google search that has been appropriately censored by the Chinese government to roll it out in China, because right now it's banned in China. And
it is banned in China. What is interesting is when I was in China a few years ago, I met with a journalism professor, and I said, well, you guys don't have access to the internet. She said, oh, yes, we do. I said, well, how do you have access? She says, we call it leaping over the Great Wall.
Right, the Great Firewall of China.
Right, exactly. Now there is a group called Good Jobs Nation, and they put out a press release today, actually, saying that the Trump administration is offshoring American jobs. They put out a report. You can look it up under Good Jobs Nation on the internet, and that is very, very interesting.
Well, Donald Trump himself, I mean, they in China, there was a bunch of Make America Great hats and yard signs and American flags for Trump's, apparently for his 2020 campaign, that were being held up in China over a tariff dispute. I mean, it's like he's still making his stuff in China.
I know. I mean, can you believe it? It's staggering.
How his followers
job report is about.
Yeah, how his followers think that he's all about bringing jobs back to America when he's continuing. The Trump companies are continuing to make stuff in China. It's just, I don't get it. I just don't get it.
Now, we have been hearing that NAFTA and Canada is going to negotiate with NAFTA to renegotiate this. However, the Trump administration, is only giving them till Friday to either say yay or nay. Mm-hmm. And that is very, very interesting. Again, I have no idea whether they're going to be in or out or how they're going to negotiate. We have not heard any of that, just that the administration is giving them till Friday.
Did you ever get to know Krista Freeland?
I did not.
She was a reporter for, I believe, the Financial Times for years, and she wrote a brilliant book about plutocrats in the United States and around the world, about the poisoning of our public discourse by great wealth. And she is now the Canadian, the finance minister, foreign minister, whatever it is, whatever her job title is, who flew back. She flew back from Europe to the United States specifically for these conversations. And I have a lot of respect for this woman. She's
I
one
see
smart
a lot
cookie.
of people in Washington and have met them, but I haven't often had conversations with them.
Yeah. But I have she's serious stuff. On the other hand, Trump hates Trudeau the way he hates McCain. Better looking, more well thought of, smarter, and so that may have something to do with it, Ellen.
And more even-minded.
Yeah, less crazy. Not at all crazy, in fact. Ellen Ratner with Talk Media News. Thanks, Ellen.
Thank you.
We'll be back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
Thank you so much for watching the Thom Hartmann Program, our program here on Free Speech TV. We really appreciate it. The main way that we support our program, that all of us who work here get our paychecks and that we keep the lights on and whatnot here. Free Speech TV does that by asking you to donate, a couple times a year, and that keeps Free Speech TV alive. We keep our show alive principally, mostly, by advertising. We have advertisers who, pay the bills. They support the program. And we've told you about some of them in the past, but really want to just move all that onto the internet. So if you would like to support our program by supporting our underwriters, our advertisers, you can go to thomhartmann.com. There's a complete list of them, or there will be soon, and just click on their little ads and find out what they have and be there for them and for us. Thank you so much.
Today we're reading The Shadow President, The Truth About Mike Pence by Michael D'Antonio. This is from the first chapter. For decades, Pence had presented himself as a humble servant who could be entrusted with power because he was at heart a mild-mannered Midwesterner. Friends and foes alike said his major character trait was extreme niceness. When given the opportunity, Pence described himself as a true Hoosier, son of Indiana, who was a Christian, a conservative, and a Republican in that order. This is how he had introduced himself to the country at the Republican National Convention 6 months earlier. The list contrasted with the usual pledge politicians make to put country first. This is what President Obama did after the 2016 election when he said, "We are not Democrats first, we are not Republicans first, we are Americans first." The vice president's self-declared identity revealed both his priorities and the source of his power. For 30 years, he had helped lead the Republican Party into a closer alliance with preachers who were turning evangelical Christianity from a religion into a political crusade that engaged in a culture war with non-believers. The aim of many was to destroy abortion rights, roll back the equality gained by gay citizens, and prepare the nation for the second coming of Christ. Pence and others used martial metaphors and considered themselves warriors of the Christian right, both besieged and called upon to fight. Quote, "Those who would have us ignore the battle being fought over life, marriage, and religious liberty have forgotten the lessons of history," said Pence in 2010. "America's darkest moments have come when economic arguments trumped moral principles." Pence's allies in his war included hugely wealthy donors who, despite their vast wealth accumulated at a time of historic inequality, also posed as victims. As libertarians in the mold of Ayn Rand's cardboard characters, they felt inhibited in the pursuit of even greater riches by a government that imposed foolish regulations and would redistribute their wealth to the supposedly indolent poor. Starting with this perspective, they denied the science behind environmental protection, demanded tax cuts for themselves, and insisted on massive reductions in programs serving anyone who wasn't rich. The victimhood claimed by both the libertarians and the Christian right permitted the construction of an alternative reality that denied their own power and masked their ambition to make politics and culture conform to an ideology that included white Christian supremacy and predatory capitalism. It also denied the progress they had made in their construction of their own political might. With his oath of office, Vice President Pence became both the free marketer's hero and the most successful Christian supremacist in American history. Most of Pence's life had been preparation for this moment, and possibly one more. His lifelong goal, set when he was a boy, was the Oval Office itself. Remarkably, he had reached this point by tying his fate to Donald J. Trump, a man whose immorality in the form of lying, cheating, and deceiving in every aspect of his life, from his marriage to his businesses, had made him a living exemplar of everything that Christianity and conservatism abhorred. However, this record also suggested that Pence was more likely to assume the highest office in the land than most vice presidents who had come before. To put it bluntly, Trump was vulnerable to impeachment. If this occurred, Pence would see the hand of God at work in his elevation to the presidency. In the meantime, he would wait and watch. On Inauguration Day, with Pence looking on, a slightly stooped Donald Trump stepped forward when it was his turn to face the Chief Justice of the United States Supreme Court, John Roberts. Beside Trump stood his wife, Melania, the former fashion model, who held two Bibles, Lincoln's and Trump's own. At the stroke of noon, the president-elect raised his right hand and placed his left on the Bibles. As he did this, Trump's family members and hundreds of political and government figures strained to see the moment. Trump and Pence were a study in contrast. At age 58, Pence appeared trim, perhaps even athletic, and could have passed for a man 10 years younger. His jacket was neatly buttoned, his hands were clasped at his waist, and his smooth face was set in a half smile. Mere feet away, in some, he resembled a small-town pastor, or maybe even a funeral director. Mere feet away, a stern-faced 70-year-old Trump stood with his coat hanging open like a caftan to reveal a long red necktie. Despite much cosmetic intervention, he looked old and tired. At the conclusion of the presidential oath, which had been voiced by 44 presidents before him, Trump said the words, "So help me God," and accepted the congratulations of those closest to him with a thin-lipped, toothless grin. He then delivered a 15-minute speech replete with distortions and falsehoods that were his trademark. He declared that America was awash with crime and despair and under constant attack. "This American carnage stops right here and stops right now," said Trump. It was the most remembered phrase of the address. That was some weird S-word, former President George W. Bush was heard to remark as he left the inaugural stand. Weird was the mildest word that one could attach to the 45th President of the United States as he launched an administration that would be stained by scandal and corruption so broad it defied a citizen's ability to grasp. Cronyism, secrecy, and nepotism would flourish. Presidential lies, daily cataloged by the Washington Post and others, would come at the rate of more than 150 per month. From the moment of his oath, Mike Pence, the vice president, faced the historic, some would say daunting, challenge of dealing with an erratic and undisciplined commander-in-chief. The book, The Shadow President, The Truth About Mike Pence.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Thom Hartmann here with you. Michael D'Antonio has a new book out. He's a contributor at CNN. He's the author of a new book titled The Shadow President, The Truth About Mike Pence. Previously, he'd written a book called The Truth About Trump. His website, by the way, michaeld'antonio.net, and you can tweet him at mbdantonio. And Michael, welcome to the program.
Thank you. Good to be with you.
I loved your book. We do book reports during the breaks for our non-commercial affiliates, where I read 3 or 4 minutes from a book. And I did your book a couple of days ago. In fact, it was just playing for our TV affiliates as we were coming up to this live segment. I just think it's extraordinary. Just to start out, what is the truth about Mike Pence that we need to know? What, to rank them, what do you think are the most important truths?
Well, I think the most important thing for people to know right now is that Pence has spent his entire adult life positioning himself for the presidency. This spot he's in, one step away from the Oval Office, was actually something he imagined as his destiny, and in college he told friends that he believed that God wanted him to be president of the United States. So this is a long-term goal that he has. He's serving now really as president in waiting. And when people wonder, well, how can he stand silently by when President Trump says many things that he's previously condemned? And I actually think there are a lot of Trump policies that are not in Mike Pence's heart. It's because he has a long-term plan, and the long-term plan is to replace Trump as soon as possible.
Do you think that Mike Pence is working in the background to help Trump get impeached?
Oh, boy. That is the $64,000 question. I think that many of the leaks that people report these days are coming from either the vice president personally or his staff and allies around the country. He's out and about campaigning far more than the president is. Every week he goes to visit one or more sites and give a stump speech. And his network of political activists, which he's been building through a PAC, is much more developed and much stronger than the president's own network. And I don't know that he's necessarily actively undermining him, but when we talk to Pence's folks, they all say Mike will be ready. And what they mean is he'll be ready the day that Donald Trump either leaves office under his own steam or is forced out.
Yeah. Interesting. The whole Mike Pence persona. Mike Pence started out as a talk show host, and I debated him some years ago here in Washington D.C. at the Heritage Foundation, as I recall, and it was a remarkable experience. The guy he was really well prepared. He's very slick. He knows his talking points, and whether it's true or not, he goes for it. And winning is everything, it seems. To what extent is his kind of fawning Christianity actually Mike Pence versus the role he's playing to get himself where he thinks he's destined to be?
Well, your observation about Mike as a debater, and you're one of the few people I've encountered who knew that he was a radio talk show host, and he actually did TV too back in the day in Indiana.
Yeah.
He's very skilled. He put together this identity, and it was the religion first, and then a libertarian economic orientation. He's very much a creature of the Koch brothers and the DeVos family. And then the last thing is the bread and butter Republican issues like gun rights and this. He previously was against deficit spending and wanted a balanced budget. Trump has proven that doesn't really matter anymore in the Republican Party. So I think the religion is part of a package. We're not really free to say, well, he believes this sincerely or he doesn't believe it. But he identified when he was young that being part of the Christian right was going to help him in Indiana, which is a very red state and very evangelical. And he's made it part of his base, and that's what he brought with him. When Trump picked him to be his running mate, he brought along that huge group of Christian right voters.
If you go back to the letter exchanges between Thomas Jefferson and James Madison in the winter of 1787, after Madison sent Jefferson the first draft of the Constitution, which explicitly says that there will not be an official religion for the United States, Jefferson was very concerned that priests might end up being politicians, that people who were religiously inclined would seek and seize political power. And he openly mused about, might there be a way to avoid this or prevent this beyond simply informing people of the danger of it. Madison thought he was being paranoid. And Madison, of course, was a Christian. Jefferson was not. And Madison's response was, the real danger is the corruption of Christianity by government. And in fact, Madison's first veto of his presidency was vetoing a bill that would have turned the poorhouses in Washington, D.C., which were funded and from the George Washington administration, created by the federal government, funded by the federal government, that would have turned those poorhouses over to the churches to administer with federal funds. And Madison vetoed that, saying that this would set a precedent that would be destructive to the United States. He was concerned that the church was going to get corrupted by having access to political power or financial resources from the federal government. It looks to me, in retrospect, like both of them were right, and that Mike Pence is the poster boy for this. Your thoughts?
Well, you really have put your finger on a key issue. Both of them were right, and I think the Constitution, especially the separation of church and state, was devised to avoid both outcomes. Those who loved the church and valued its role, especially in private life, didn't want the government to have anything to do with it, and that actually was a very Baptist point of view, and it's why the Southern Baptist Convention until the 1970s was adamant about separation of church and state. And at the same time, people were worried that priests, as you described them, would get involved in government. And this is why JFK was asked over and over again about who would have the greater influence on him, the Pope or the American people, and he had to ultimately sign a statement saying that he is for the American people and will take no orders from the Vatican.
Right.
Flash forward now, we have in Pence a guy who thought he would be a priest when he was a young man, is very devoted to making Christianity the dominant stream in American social life, and actually has given speeches where he speaks wistfully of the days prior to the Declaration of Independence when some colonies actually had state churches. He thinks that was a good idea.
Massachusetts in particular. I mean, that's why Ben Franklin fled to Pennsylvania when he was a young man. He was so horrified by it. So what do we do with this knowledge, Michael?
Well, I think we do what everyone's doing around the president. We stay focused. We announce what's going on. I think every day Trump gives us something to describe and identify and make sure that we understand so that it goes into our calculus when it comes to voting. And I think with Mike Pence, the same is true. He has a right to all of his faith beliefs, and certainly I don't denigrate his style of religion. It's his to embrace. But we should know about it. We should know that he wants to roll back equality for gay Americans. He wants to roll back Roe v. Wade. He doesn't believe that there is such a thing as evolution, and he thinks that climate science is all false. So as long as we know this, and it informs us when we do our civic duty, I think that's all the obligation we have.
Seems like a great start. The book is The Shadow President, The Truth About Mike Pence by Michael D'Antonio with Peter Eisner. And the website, michaeld'antonio.net, and you can tweet him at mbdantonio. Michael, thank you so much for dropping by today.
Thanks, Tom.
Great talking with you. Great book, and a great contribution. I'm looking forward to tracking down a copy of your book on Trump, too. Thank you so much. We'll be back.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
We'll be back with more of the news of the day and your calls right after this. And welcome back. Howard in Coriopolis, Pennsylvania. Hey, Howard, thanks for watching us on Free Speech TV. What's on your mind today?
I was wondering if yourself and that gentleman, I think his name is Mr. Wolf, could have get together and talk about the dangers of the national debt, the threat that national debt has to Medicare and Social Security. And you two guys can kick it around, and because you're
Sure, that's a great suggestion. I'll ask Sean to put it on the one sheet for tomorrow. I think we're talking with Michael Wolf tomorrow. I can just tell you right off the top, Howard, the national debt represents no threat whatsoever to Social Security because Social Security is entirely self-funded. It's funded with the Social Security tax. There is $2.5 trillion sitting in the Social Security Trust Fund right now, and Social Security is doing just fine. But we do need to lift the cap so that the income to Social Security goes up. But it does not vary or change with regard to the national debt. Medicare is another thing. Medicare is funded out of the general fund. There is a Medicare fund that we do pay into, but it's not as well insulated as the Social Security fund. And Medicaid, of course, is hugely vulnerable. So, but I'll bring that up with Richard Wolf tomorrow. I think that's a great suggestion. Thank you very much, for that, Howard, and great to hear from you. Mary in Spokane, Washington, watching us on Facebook Live. Hey, Mary, what's up?
Hey, how's it going?
Good.
Boy,
Anyway.
I love your talk. The greatest thing about your show is you hit on such wonderful topics, and
Well, thank
you
you.
allow people to call in. You don't just rant for hours. I wanted to mention what's amazed me these last 20 years is how much money people are they're more concerned about how much money they're making off of disasters. Everybody's into disaster recovery. Nobody's into disaster prevention or building code reform in order to quench some of the natural disasters going on. Like I've said numerous times, we went to war in Iraq over, sadly, all the people that were killed in the Twin Towers, but compared to how many people die each year worldwide due to building code, inadequate building codes, in an environment that is toxic, we're looking at, on average, 300,000 people a year die, and 900,000 are displaced every year because of building codes being inadequate, where people are not taking into account the natural disaster environmental history for the region in which they're building in. And the government, the federal government, even in the United States, when we were our founding fathers knew this, and that's how most of our municipalities and things are designed to flow with nature, whether they be the Pentagon or the dome on the White House, and these things that we've done, and all your water towers. A lot of the buildings are actually designed to flow with nature, but your regular everyday people, they're not. And this is because when the court went over this, they said, well, let's argue the circle inside the box, and we'll complain about all the square footage and taxes we'll lose because of how small the building's going to be, instead of arguing the circle on the outside of the box. So codes never changed in America, even though they were written into the Constitution.
I got it. Mary, we're out of time. Thank you. Thanks. I share your concern. We'll be right back. Thank you so much for watching the Thom Hartmann Program, our program here on Free Speech TV. We really appreciate it. The main way that we support our program, that all of us who work here get our paychecks and that we keep the lights on and whatnot here. Free Speech TV does that by asking you to donate, a couple times a year, and that keeps Free Speech TV alive. We keep our show alive principally, mostly, by advertising. We have advertisers who pay the bills. They support the program. And we've told you about some of them in the past, but really want to just move all that onto the internet. So if you would like to support our program by supporting our underwriters, our advertisers, you can go to thomhartmann.com. There's a complete list of them, or there will be soon, and just click on their little ads and find out what they have and be there for them and for us. Thank you so much.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. So, as always happens when I talk about diet or weight or anything like that, I start getting feedback from people, be it on Twitter or email or whatever, saying, "What, are you trying to fat shame me? You don't like fat people?" No, I'm not. I'm not trying to do that. You can be any weight you want, and I think it's absolutely an abomination the way that we, as a culture, and you see this in our media, you see this in I mean, it's just like baked into our culture. Basically associate moral failure with being overweight, and it's not a moral failure, and it's an insanely complex thing, and there are all kinds of variables. From now we're discovering there's even a relationship between healthy or unhealthy gut bacteria and weight. There's there's obviously genetic pieces to that. My point that I was talking about was when A was the high fructose corn syrup and the use of antidepressants, which I think is consequential, and B, diet itself. And this is probably the area where I will diverge from people who want to defend basically the standard American diet, the SAD. I have known, a number of overweight vegetarians throughout my life, but I've never known an overweight vegan. I really think that eating dead animals, when we're not doing it for survival, is not good for our health and throws us out of balance. And eating animal products, in fact, cheese, dairy products, eggs, throws us out of balance and contributes to obesity and a variety of other health problems. I was talking about my own blood pressure. Now, my father had high blood pressure. My grandmother had high blood pressure. It's clearly there's a genetic thing. That's for me what being overweight is for somebody else. It's the thing that I have to work with. It's the thing that I have. It's my challenge. And I've discovered that I can get it under control with diet. I just, wanted to share that. I thought it was fascinating. So anyhow, enough of that. It's starting to sound like I'm being defensive, and I don't mean to be. Kitty in South Florida, listening on Sirius XM. Hey, Kitty, what's on your mind?
Hi, I wanted to talk about Citizens United really quick, but I also wanted to say, because I'm in Florida, I really like Gillum.
Gillum, yeah.
Yeah, I think that the reason why he came out of nowhere is because I don't think they took into account young people's vote. I really think that he has spoken to a lot of the high schoolers that had to be dealing with some of the things that they were here in Florida. I think they're the ones that pushed him up. That's just my opinion.
I think that the pollsters are just polling the traditional Democratic voters, people who have historically been Democratic voters, and there's a whole wave of people coming in who might have registered as independents who are going to be voting Democratic, and they're not being picked up in the polls. Back to you, Kitty.
Yes. Okay, so the whole big deal these days is, we don't want foreigners influencing our elections. That's what all the Russia hubbub is about, and I agree. And correct me if I'm wrong, American companies don't necessarily have to be owned by Americans. So we could have companies here, big companies, that are owned by Saudis, Chinese nationals, Russians, whoever.
And we have many of them. And we also have more, quote, American companies like General Electric that do more than half of their business outside the United States, which raises the question, what is an American company?
Sure. And same thing with investors. I know, like, Disney World is owned by, I think, a lot of Saudis, so it's like kind of a Saudi-owned company.
Good chunk of the Disney stock, yeah.
Yeah. But the point is, if American companies are now, because of Citizens United, people, and they could put their money in a major way into our politics by putting their money in PACs or candidates, isn't that foreigners in a roundabout way putting the thumb on our scale?
It is, and it's. As we're talking, I'm Googling Tokyo Rose and Citizens United to see if I can find. It's not going to be easy to find. In John Paul Stevens' dissent in Citizens United, he talked about how under this decision, the Citizens United decision that the Supreme Court did in 2010, that Tokyo Rose, who was the propagandist during World War II, she was a Japanese person who was broadcasting in English to American troops saying, oh, you should just, you guys are going to lose, our kamikaze pilots are going to take you out, you should just surrender. That Tokyo Rose would be entitled to fund the elections of American candidates for office. And he was right. It is, any country right now and any billionaire anywhere in the world right now can influence U.S. elections, and there's nothing to stop it. There is just some stuff around the edges. So, Kitty, it's a huge problem. I gotta take this break. Thank you.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
We'll be back with more of the news of the day and your calls right after this.
It's the Thom Hartmann.
It's the Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from Elaine Pagel's book, The Gnostic Gospels. This is from chapter 3, God the Father, God the Mother.
Unlike many of his contemporaries among the deities of the ancient Near East, the God of Israel shared his power with no female divinity, nor was he the divine husband or lover of any. He can scarcely be characterized in any but masculine epithets: king, lord, master, judge, and father. Indeed, the absence of feminine symbolism for God marks Judaism, Christianity, and Islam in striking contrast to the world's other religious traditions, whether in Egypt, Babylonia, Greece, and Rome, or in Africa, India, and North America, which abound in female symbolism. Jewish, Christian, and Islamic theologians today are quick to point out that God is not to be considered in sexual terms at all, yet the actual language they use daily in worship and prayer conveys a completely different message. Who, growing up Jewish or Christian tradition, has escaped the distinct impression that God is masculine? And while Catholics revere Mary as the mother of Jesus, they never identify her as divine in her own right. If she is the mother of God, she is not God the Mother, on an equal footing with God the Father. Christianity, of course, added the Trinitarian terms to the Jewish description of God, yet of the three divine persons, two, the Father and the Son, are described in masculine terms, and the third, the Spirit, suggests the sexlessness of the Greek neuter term for spirit, pneuma. Whoever investigates the early history of Christianity, the field called patristics, that is, study of the fathers of the church, will be prepared for the passage that concludes the Gospel of Thomas. Simon Peter said to the disciples, "Let Mary leave us, for women are not worthy of life." Jesus said, "I myself shall lead her in order to make her male, so that she too may become a living spirit resembling you males. For every woman will make herself male, who will make herself male will enter the kingdom of heaven." End of quote from the Gospel of Thomas. Strange as it sounds, this simply states what religious rhetoric assumes, that the men form the legitimate body of the community while women are allowed to participate only when they assimilate themselves to men. Other texts discovered at Nag Hammadi demonstrate one striking difference between these heretical sources and the orthodox ones. Gnostic sources continually use sexual symbolism to describe God. One might expect that these texts would show the influence of archaic pagan traditions of the mother goddess, but for the most part, their language is specifically Christian, unmistakably related to a Jewish heritage. Yet instead of describing a monastic and masculine God, many of these texts speak of God as a dyad who embraces both masculine and feminine elements. One group of Gnostic sources claims to have received a secret tradition from Jesus through James and through Mary Magdalene. Members of this group prayed to both the Divine Father and Mother. Quote, "From thee, Father, and through thee, Mother, the two immortal names, parents of the divine being, and thou, dweller in heaven, humanity, of the mighty name." The end of the quote from the prayer. Other texts indicate that the authors had wondered to whom a single masculine God proposed, quote, "Let us make man in our image after our likeness," in Genesis 1:26. Since the Genesis account goes on to say that humanity was created, quote, "male and female," some concluded that the God in whose image we are made must also be both masculine and feminine, both father and mother. How do these texts characterize the Divine Mother? I find no simple answer, since the texts themselves are extremely diverse. Yet we may sketch out three primary characterizations. In the first place, several Gnostic groups describe the Divine Mother as part of an original couple. Valentinius, the teacher and poet, begins with the premise that God is essentially indescribable. But he suggests that the divine can be imagined as a dyad, consisting in one part of the ineffable, the depth, the primal Father, and in the other of grace, silence, the womb, and mother of all. Valentinius reasons that silence is the appropriate complement of the Father, designating the former as feminine and latter as masculine because of the grammatical gender of the Greek words. He goes on to describe how silence receives, as in a womb, the seed of the ineffable source. From this she brings forth all the emanations of a divine being, ranged in harmonious pairs of masculine and feminine energies. Followers of Valentinius prayed to her for protection as the mother and as the mystical eternal silence. For example, Marcus, the magician, invokes her as grace, in Greek the feminine term charis. Quote, "May she who is before all things, the incomprehensible and indescribable grace, fill you within and increase in you her own knowledge." End of quote from the Gospels. In his secret celebration of the Mass, Marcus teaches that the wine symbolizes her blood. As the cup of wine is offered, he prays that grace may flow into all who drink it. A prophet and visionary, Marcus calls himself the womb and recipient of silence.
as she is of the Father. The visions he received of the divine being appeared, he reports, in female form. Another Gnostic writing, called the Great Announcement, quoted by Hippolytus in his Refutation of All Heresies, explains the origin of the universe as follows, quote, "From the power of silence appeared a great power, the mind of the universe, which manages all things, and is a male. The other, a great intelligence, is a female which produces all things." Following the gender of the Greek words for mind and intelligence, this author explains that these powers joined in union and are discovered to be in duality. The book, The Gnostic Gospels, by Elaine Pagels. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you, and picking up your phone calls. Mike in South Florida. Hey, Mike, thanks for listening to Sirius XM. What's on your mind?
Pleasure to talk to you, Tom. Great show as always. Going back to Congressman Pocamp talking about health care. I just want to give a shout out to South Florida yet again. I appreciate the mention of Andrew Gillum. Just pointing out who we're running against. In Florida, three of the major candidates that have won are Andrew Gillum and Lauren Baer going after Brian Mast, and of course the great Bill Nelson running against the horrendous Rick Scott. All three of those opponents, although they are Republicans, of course, all are Trump-loving, Medicare expanding, bashing Republicans. And it's hard to say this, Tom, but DeSantis is the worst of the three. So that's saying something.
Wow.
Just want to point that out to all our Floridians who are voting. I don't care if you're a Democrat, Independent, even a Republican. Unless you're a Trump supporter, you need to vote Democratic in Florida because this state needs help. And Rick Scott is especially good at pushing for Medicare improvement after he, doesn't offer it to its citizens, and he's very good at playing both sides.
Yeah.
I do want to point out one thing unrelated to politics, if I could.
Sure.
You'll humor me. Yesterday you talked about the Catholic Church.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a former Catholic, and you mentioned celibacy. I just want to point out, because you're the third prominent, respected person to say this, that celibacy helps to add to this problem. Celibacy is practiced by many people for many different reasons. Nuns practice celibacy, yet most of them don't turn into child pedophiles or rapists. I would dispute the celibacy, even though I think it's a ridiculous, archaic idea for any religious institution. But believe me, the institution creates an atmosphere for these criminals to enter into their realm. Has nothing to do with their sexual needs. It has to do with violence and power. And I just want to point that out, not to dispute you. I understand that you're against the whole concept of celibacy, so am I. But these criminals and these predators are not only permitted into the, the organization, but they are then protected. And that's what's wrong with the Catholic Church, not celibacy in itself.
Well, I think that's probably coming to an end, and I think the difference between priests and nuns has to do with the most dangerous drug on earth, testosterone, and it's a very real problem. There are when I was in India. There are problems in some of the Buddhist sects where they have celibate priesthoods that are entirely male, where they've got the exact same problem the Catholic Church has, and it was starting to get a lot of publicity the last time I was in India, and these are issues that I think should be discussed, and the Church is absolutely unwilling to discuss them. But I'm not Catholic, so it's not my I don't have a. Maybe there's something there that I'm missing, right? But
you know what? No, Tom, you don't have to be Catholic to enter into this discussion. This is not a Catholic.
Yeah, no, I get that, Mike. I'm not excluding myself from the conversation. I'm just saying maybe I'm missing something. But Mike, thank you. Very well said. And in fact, from Mike to Mike, this is Mike listening on KPFK in Los Angeles. Hey, Mike, what's up?
Hey, I just wanted to correct a statement that's been made a couple of times the past 2 weeks that the Church of England priests have become able to marry in our lifetime. Actually, that happened 471 years ago.
Really?
In the Tudor days.
What religion am I thinking of then?
I don't know, but one thing that happened in the Church of England in '94 is that women became able to be.
Oh, that's what I'm remembering then, because it was just a huge big deal at the time.
Yeah. And, well, of course, the women being priests could marry men, and that's the first time men could be married by Church of England priests.
Right. Okay. Thank you for that, Mike.
No
Thank you. I appreciate it. Very good. When I'm wrong, I like to have it corrected right away so I don't keep repeating something that's not right. Van in Lewis Center, Ohio. Van, what's on your mind today?
Well, I wasn't going to call today, but I got a chill going through my spine. I was getting my AC repaired, and I felt comfortable in asking the gentleman if he was registered to vote. Did he vote? He told me he was. And then I said, well, you know, you have to, with Ohio, you know, they're purging people from the voting. They're closing poll places and stuff. And I was explaining to him about voter suppression, and he was so surprised. I said, if you haven't voted in about 2 or 3 years, maybe, whatever the number is, I said, they'll take your name off the voting registration. And I said, well, did you vote the last election, which was August 7th? He said, why do you know anything about it? I said, well, you know what, you have to, you know, call your Board of Elections and, you know, make sure your name is on there. Talk to everyone that you know, people that you feel comfortable with talking to about voting. I said, because this election, I said, this is it for us. This is it for America, period. I said, we have got to vote. And he said, I'm so shocked, and I didn't know that. I said, yeah, well, you know, you go out there and, you know, go ahead and call and tell your family and friends to do the same thing. So it just really kind of, you know, took me by surprise. And I know he probably was one of those people that vote for the presidential election because he was African American, and you know, and that's who they're purging.
Yep, you're absolutely right,
and
it's the biggest story that's not being discussed by our media right now is that the entire Republican electoral strategy, and this has been going on for several decades. The entire the basis, the core, the foundation of the Republican electoral strategy, in addition to reaching out to white racists, is to suppress the vote of people who are not white racists. And they've been very, very effective at it. Van, thank you for pointing that out. Thanks for the call, and good on you for waking up a friend or a neighbor or, you know, an AC repairman. Steve in Rhode Island. Hey, Steve, what's up? Steve in Rhode Island, listening to Sirius XM. Okay, sorry, Steve. Call back. Jack in Petaluma, California. Hey, Jack, what's on your mind today?
Good morning, Tom. What I'd like to speak to you about in global warming, last week there was an article about Pennsylvania, York County, complaining that Binghamton, New York, released over 50 million gallons of untreated storm drain and sewer water into the Susquehanna River.
Yeah, this is the result of the flooding that's happening because the jet stream is breaking down and we're getting massive flooding events that historically we didn't get, right?
Yeah. Now, one thing I want to tell you, you were also talking about flu yesterday in China. Now, during that same period of time, we had small children from all over the world in Williamsport, Pennsylvania, which I'm sure takes its drinking water from the Susquehanna River. They're playing baseball in the Little League World Series. Now, talk about a way to spread whatever all through the world.
Yeah.
I mean, there are teams there from Africa, from Europe, all over the world.
These kind of things are going to become big problems if we have a flu pandemic, Jack. I'm not so concerned about something from sewage being spread around, but, you know, spot on. The story, and thank you for the call. This is a story I was talking about on Monday where there is a flu virus. My recollection is it's H9N7 that is widespread in China. I mean, local, it's killed a few hundred people. It kills 40% of the people who catch it. It's a bird flu virus, and so it can travel all around the world with migrating birds. And this virus, we need to have a vaccine against. There's no immunity to this virus in the American gene pool, as it were. We've not been exposed to an H9N7 virus before, ever. And the Chinese government, which has this virus, they say, under control in China, is refusing to give samples of it to the U.S. government so that we can develop vaccines. At the same time that they are starting to militarize the waters around South China and around Taiwan and around the Spratly Islands. And all of that together gives me great pause. It concerns me tremendously, actually. So anyhow, Susan in Mountain View, Arkansas. Hey, Susan, what's on your mind today?
Hi, I've been watching you for a long, long time, Tom.
Well, thank you.
I have just a couple of things I wanted to say about Trump. And this is a man who, I've worked in mental health for a long time, and he's such a typical sociopath. And why I say that is because he has so many of the symptoms, which, these are dangerous people, and while some of them are in prison, people like Trump are smarter, and they get away with things. They know how to get in your head, and they know how to get what they want. And whenever you don't do what they want, they're extremely vindictive towards the people who don't, like he has been with Sessions, who he used to be really close with.
And McCain.
Emotionally, they're very childlike and throw these tantrums that are not at all normal. And this is what is upsetting so many people, is his behavior is really just, like that. And he's very careful to hide the truth. And they're emotionally, they have no ability to be empathetic or love or care about any other individual. They're bullies.
I think you've nailed it, Susan. And I share your concern. I really and truly do. Thank you so much for the call. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
We'll be right back with more of your calls right after this. And welcome back. Steve in Yuma, Arizona, watching us on Free Speech TV. Hey, Steve, what's up?
Hey, Tom. I normally don't watch commercial television, but last night I was watching a Hollywood version of Climate Change the Day After Tomorrow.
Mm-hmm.
And something quite interesting happened.
You're talking about the old movie, the movie from about a decade ago?
Yeah. Where it's, it's scientifically not factual, but...
But it's based on science, actually.
There you go. Anyway, towards the end of the movie, I don't know if this was a PSA or a commercial, but I found it to be really interesting. It started with two cars at a red light, both gold-colored, one obviously kind of older and one newer. And the newer one was a Chevrolet. You could see the logo on the grill. Anyway, they took off, and the gist of the commercial is that electric cars are fast, they're high performance.
Mm-hmm.
So at the end of this PSA or commercial or whatever it was, it came up, it said electric for all, plug into the present.com. And then down at the bottom it said sponsored by Volkswagen Group of America. So I thought that was kind of, it was a very cute commercial. And they played the Jetsons theme song while it was going on, which was pretty neat.
That's interesting. So in other words, the big automakers are figuring out that electric cars are the future and that it's a great marketing tool.
That's right. And here
That's a good sign.
It's sponsored by Volkswagen, but they had a Chevrolet vehicle in it.
Yeah, that is a great sign. Thanks for thanks for calling, Stephen.
Well, I'm not done.
Okay.
One more thing. One more thing,
right.
if I may. Here in Yuma, we have more hours of uninterrupted sunlight than any place in North America.
Really?
And thanks to President Obama, the Agua Caliente photovoltaic farm was put in Yuma County, just north of Dayland. And my understanding is it's the largest PV farm in the world. And one thing that's very interesting about that is every single kilowatt goes to the Bay Area. Not a drop of it is used in Arizona. And it is capable of supporting 250,000 households, which where I live would mean the entire city. And
you wonder what the line losses are. I mean, traditionally, you get over 100 miles and you start looking at line losses in the double digits in terms of the percentage of lost energy that's, radiated out as electromagnetic radiation or generated as waste heat.
Absolutely. That's a point that I would accentuate. And but I thought it was rather odd because Yuma is now the third largest city in Arizona. Mm-hmm. And they could have electrified the entire Yuma metropolitan area with that one plant. And it would provide power even in the period of time when all of the winter visitors come down here when the population swells.
Right.
So it would have been kind of an interesting feather in the hat of the city to say this is America's first city that is completely powered by.
I'm guessing the city, the principal power provider to the city is a for-profit company.
That's right.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. There's your answer. I mean, that's why it's going the way it is.
Yeah.
Steve, thanks for the call, and thanks for watching us on Free Speech TV there in Yuma. We'll be back. It's 10 minutes before the hour. We'll be back with more of your calls in just a second. Thank you so much for watching the Thom Hartmann Program, our program here on Free Speech TV. We really appreciate it. The main way that we support our program, that all of us who work here get our paychecks and that we keep the lights on and whatnot here. Free Speech TV does that by asking you to donate, a couple times a year, and that keeps Free Speech TV alive. We keep our show alive principally, mostly, by advertising. We have advertisers who pay the bills. They support the program. And we've told you about some of them in the past, but really want to just move all that out of the internet. Hey, Steve, what's on your mind?
Thank you so very much for taking my call. I'm a native Atlantan senior citizen, and I first want to thank you for one of the, Free TV, especially you, one of the few people who would take our African American history and broadcast it and look at it very truly and objectively. So that's the first major thank you that I have for you, sir.
Thank you.
And now my other question is this: I'm trying to do some research on you. A very interesting statement. I'm a native Atlanta that you made about a month ago. You say you lived in Atlanta for a period of time. And in Atlanta, you was talking to a council person, mm-hmm. and he said that Peachtree, because I've always been curious, it seemed like 1,000 Peachtree. How did that get started and what the history was? But you said that this council person said that blacks were not, I think that's what you said, were not able to walk on Peachtree Street.
Walk, live, or work. And that law apparently was taken down in the 1960s.
Oh, yeah, but so it was on the books until the 1960s?
That's my understanding. I've never actually verified that, but I've heard that from a number of people. When we lived in Atlanta for 13 years, and yeah.
Okay, would you know any council? Well, probably the council person not on the council anymore. You don't
No,
know
he's not.
anyone
He's retired, and I'd rather not name him because I'm just not certain that it's actually the case. But I should, this is something I've told this story more than once on the air, and I really should Google it and get the find out if it's true or not, because I don't want to be spreading misinformation. But I do know, and Steve, you know, if you live in Atlanta, that you don't see Peachtree streets in predominantly black suburbs of Atlanta, but you do see them in the white suburbs of Atlanta.
Listen, I was an activist, and I used to represent all the cabs in Atlanta, and I'm all over the place. And so that's why I'm curious. Now, what could put me on the right track of sort of Googling that?
Yeah, I think probably Peachtree Street, African Americans, civil rights. I'm not sure, but you've got me going on this now, Steve. So I'm going to look it up too when we get off the air, and we can talk about it on the air tomorrow. Steve, thank you for the call.
I look forward to it. I thank you so much for being objective.
I do my best, Steve. Thank you so much. Thanks for your kind words, and thanks for watching us on Free Speech TV. I really appreciate it. Robert in Fairfield, California. Hey, Robert, what's on your mind today?
Well, I just wanted to mention that I just changed my registration the other day from Republican to Democrat.
Oh, that's a big deal. What provoked you to do that?
Well, I think this president we've got and a lot of the repercussions of everything else that's happening lately.
For example?
Well, just the way he acts and the way we're not doing things, which I think is the right way, and also I guess lately this thing with McCain has kind of energized me to do things along that line too.
Yeah, I think that's pushed a lot of Republicans over the top.
Republican, I have a lot in common with McCain. Actually, I went to the University of California and took Naval ROTC approximately the same time that McCain was at the Naval Academy.
Do you think that a lot of Republicans, have you had this conversation with friends of yours who are Republicans, are so offended by Trump? Because it sounds to me like the principal thing about Trump that offends you is his demeanor, basically, that he's not presidential, that he's petty, that he's a wannabe tyrant, and that he's basically perfectly willing to use our troops as props when it's useful to him, but doesn't obviously have any appreciation for them, as we can see in the way he's treating McCain. Do you agree with my characterization of what I think I'm hearing you say? And if so, do you think that other Republicans are jumping on that bandwagon with you?
Well, I think so. Of course, there's other things. The way he tries to promote himself by doing things, just changing things. Like, for instance, this thing with the tax thing, basically promotes it as if it's good for everybody, but it's only good for the ultra-rich. And
like him.
And other things. He does it, well, there's the other thing that with North Korea, it's a publicity type thing, if he tries to think. And everything he does is just for himself.
Yeah. And so if he was George W. Bush, I mean, if he was pursuing many of the same policies, trying to privatize Social Security or cut Medicare or whatever, giving tax cuts, but George W. Bush was not an ass, forgive the word, but I don't know how else to say it, you'd still be with him?
Being with Trump?
Yeah, if he actually had some decorum about him and respect for other people?
Well, maybe, but I'm going on. Well, the decorum is terrible. I agree with that, but it's also what he does and how he does it.
So it's both the person and the policies. That's fascinating, Robert. Thank you for calling and sharing your perspective with us. I appreciate it, and thank you for watching us on Free Speech TV there in California. We'll be back tomorrow. In the meantime, don't forget, democracy is not a spectator sport. And you want to check out something, check out the Washington Post today. There's an article by A.J. Angelo titled How Betsy DeVos Could Trigger Another Financial Meltdown. This is something, I'll talk about it on the air tomorrow. It's something that's really worth sharing with everybody you know and reading yourself. And don't forget, democracy is not a spectator sport. It requires you. Get out there, get active, tag, you're it. We'll see you tomorrow.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit ThomHartmann.com.
from UNH.
Thank you so much for watching the Thom Hartmann program, our program here on Free Speech TV. We really appreciate it. The main way that we support our program, that all of us who work here get our paychecks and that we keep the lights on and whatnot here. Free Speech TV does that by asking you to donate, a couple times a year, and that keeps Free Speech TV alive. We keep our show alive principally, mostly, by advertising. We have advertisers who pay the bills. They support the program. And we've told you about some of them in the past, but really want to just move all that onto the internet. So if you would like to support our program by supporting our underwriters, our advertisers, you can go to thomhartmann.com. There's a complete list of them, or there will be soon, and just click on their little ads and find out what they have and be there for them and for us. Thank you so much.